SpongeBob SquarePants has been living in people's heads for over 25 years. A cartoon about a sponge who flips burgers at the bottom of the ocean somehow became one of the most culturally embedded things television has ever produced. Memes, musicals, spin-offs, theme parks, an entire generation that grew up speaking its language without ever being taught it. But before all of that, there was season 1, 20 episodes, a marine biology teacher with an idea and a Hawaiian shirt, and a world that nobody saw coming. Welcome to Cartoonology. Let's get into it. The origin of Bikini Bottom, from marine biology classroom to Nickelodeon. Before there was a pineapple under the sea, before there was a Krusty Krab, a Krabby Patty, or a laugh that sounded like a dolphin being startled, before any of it, there was a marine biology teacher at a small educational institute in Dana Point, California, drawing pictures of sea creatures to help kids understand tide pools. That teacher was Steven Hillenburg, and the drawings he made for those kids would eventually become one of the most watched cartoons in television history. Hillenburg grew up in Anaheim, California, fascinated by two things that had almost nothing to do with each other: the ocean and art. He studied marine biology in college and graduated in 1984. After graduating, he joined the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, an organization dedicated to teaching the public about marine science and ocean history. He worked there as a marine science educator for several years, taking students out to tide pools and teaching them about the animals that lived there. He later described that experience as genuinely exciting. He saw firsthand how curious children got when they were face to face with the strange creatures living in the shallow water along the California coast. While working at the institute, Hillenburg started making a comic book. Not for fun exactly, as a teaching tool. He wanted something that would make the animals of the tide pool feel interesting and approachable to the kids who came through. So he created a small illustrated book called The Intertidal Zone, completed in 1989. The book was full of anthropomorphic sea creatures, animals that walked and talked and had personalities. One of the main characters was a sponge, named Bob the Sponge, who functioned as a kind of host and guide for the reader. Rocky the Shrimp was another co-host. The whole thing was drawn by hand, designed to be fun and educational at the same time. Hillenburg tried to get The Intertidal Zone published as a proper comic book. He sent it out to publishers and got nowhere. Nobody was interested. The comic stayed unpublished, but the characters inside it stayed with him. At some point during his time at the institute, Hillenburg realized something had shifted in him. He was still interested in marine science, still passionate about ocean life, but he was becoming more interested in the art side of what he was doing. The drawings mattered to him more than he had expected. By 1987, before the comic was even finished, he had decided to pursue animation full-time. He enrolled at the California Institute of the Arts, known widely as Cal Arts, in Santa Clarita, California. His application was helped significantly by the Intertidal Zone itself. The legendary animation teacher Jules Engel accepted him partly on the strength of that work. At Cal Arts, Hillenburg made his thesis film, a short called Wormholes, which was funded by the Princess Grace Foundation and shown at various animation festivals. That film brought him into contact with other animators and eventually led to a meeting that changed the direction of his career. In 1992, a man named Joe Murray, who had just sold a cartoon called Rocko's Modern Life to Nickelodeon, met Hillenburg at an animation festival and offered him a job as a director on the show. Hillenburg spent 4 years working on Rocko's Modern Life, eventually rising to creative director and showrunner after Murray left. That experience mattered enormously. Rocko was made without traditional scripts. The writers worked from short 2-page outlines, and the storyboard artists added most of the dialogue and jokes during the drawing stage. Hillenburg absorbed that way of working and carried it with him. When Rocko's Modern Life ended in 1996, he immediately started thinking about his next project. He went back to the Intertidal Zone. A writer named Martin Olson, who had worked with Hillenburg on Rocko, found pages from the old comic and told Hillenburg he should develop those characters into an animated series. Hillenburg started working on it, bringing in a group of people he trusted, several of them former Rocko crew members. Derek Dryman became the creative director. Sherm Cohen, Dan Povenmire, and others joined the team. The work of building the show began. The character at the center of it was going to be a sponge. Hillenburg had decided this deliberately. He wanted a single main character who was genuinely strange, not a duo like the Ren and Stimpy show, not a group of friends. One character, and the strangest sea creature he could think of, the one he kept coming back to, was a sponge. Specifically a kitchen sponge, rectangular and yellow, rather than the rounder, more naturalistic sea sponge Bob the Sponge had resembled in the Intertidal Zone. He wanted the character to look obviously artificial, obviously absurd. That square shape was going to be part of who he was. The character's original name was going to be Sponge Boy. The show was going to be called Sponge Boy Ahoy. Voice recording for the original 7-minute pilot had already been completed in 1997 using that name when Nickelodeon's legal department discovered that Sponge Boy was already a trademarked name. It belonged to a company that made art-themed called Pencil Products, so the name had to change. Hillenburg decided that whatever the new name was, it still had to contain the word sponge, so that viewers would not mistake the character for something else. He did not want anyone watching the show and thinking they were looking at a cheese man. The solution he landed on was SpongeBob. For the last name, he went with SquarePants, a reference to the character's rectangular shape, and a phrase that, as Hillenburg put it, had a nice ring to it. The show became SpongeBob SquarePants. Now came the pitch. To get Nickelodeon to greenlight a full series, Hillenburg had to walk into a room with network executives and convince them the show was worth making. He did not do this with a PowerPoint presentation or a neat folder of notes. He wore a Hawaiian shirt. He brought a handmade underwater terrarium, a glass tank filled with sand, water, and small models of the characters. He played Hawaiian music in the room to establish the atmosphere he was going for. He brought a storyboard. He brought small, squeezable toys. He played Tiny Tim's song, Livin' in the Sunlight, Lovin' in the Moonlight, as the musical accompaniment for the pilot's climactic scene. The response from the executives in the room was not measured or professional. Two of the Nickelodeon officials, Kevin Kay and Albie Hecht, had to step outside the room because they were, in Hecht's description, exhausted from laughing. Hecht later called it a performance he wished he had on tape. The network gave Hillenburg money and 2 weeks to write the pilot episode. The result was Help Wanted, the episode that would eventually air as the very first SpongeBob episode. It was written by Hillenburg, Derek Dryman, and Tim Hill. The recording script was completed on May 12, 1997. The final storyboard was done by June 3, 1997. The finished master was delivered to Nickelodeon Animation Studio in September of that year. That 1997 version of Help Wanted was not yet the episode most people know. It was slightly different. Different credits, a different opening, some minor animation variations. It was essentially a proof of concept, a demonstration that the show worked. Nickelodeon kept it internally for a while. The only copy that escaped into the world was on a VHS tape called The Best of Nicktoons 1998, which was given exclusively to employees of Nickelodeon Animation Studio. That tape did not surface publicly until decades later. In April 1998, the original version of Help Wanted was shown publicly for the first time in Austin, Texas, at a screening event for kids and families, alongside the premieres of Cat Dog and Action League Now. The response was good enough to move forward. Nickelodeon made an announcement in December 1998 that the show was coming, with 13 episodes planned. The official television premiere came on May 1, 1999. Help Wanted aired on Nickelodeon as a sneak peek immediately following the network's Kids' Choice Awards that evening. With it aired 2 companion short episodes, Reef Blower, a silent comedy with no dialogue at all, and Tea at the Tree Dome, which introduced Sandy Cheeks. All 3 were packaged together as the first episode. The show's official ongoing weekly run began on July 17, 1999, with the second episode. The night of May 1, 1999, Help Wanted drew 6.9 million viewers. Of those, 3.6 million were children between the ages of 2 and 11. Another 3.3 million were teenagers and adults. For a premiere airing immediately after a live awards show with no established audience, those numbers were strong. The show had landed. Season 1 ran from May 1, 1999, all the way through to March 3, 2001, consisting of 20 episodes. It was produced at Nickelodeon Animation Studio in Burbank, California, with the actual animation completed overseas at Rough Draft Studios Korea in Seoul, South Korea. The California crew handled storyboarding, writing, direction, and voice recording. The Korea crew animated each scene by hand, colored the cells on computers, and painted the backgrounds. The final editing and music work was done back in California. The animation for Season 1 specifically was done using traditional cell animation, a process where each individual frame is hand-painted onto a transparent sheet of plastic called a cell. Every color had to be applied by hand. A frame would be painted, left to dry, and then the next color would be applied. Paul Tibbett, who later became executive producer, described it years afterward as doing things the old-fashioned way, where every single cell had to be part painted and left to dry before more colors could be added. After Season 1, the show switched to digital ink and paint, which was faster and easier to correct. Season 1 remains the only season ever made with the traditional cell process. The slightly different visual quality of those early episodes, the colors slightly more muted, the lines a little warmer, comes directly from that. The writing process on the show was unusual from the very beginning. Most animated shows at the time used full written scripts. SpongeBob did not. Following the same approach Hillenburg had used on Rocco, a small team of outline writers would develop the concept for an episode, typically a 2-page summary of the story. That outline would then be handed to a team of storyboard directors, who would draw the episode out in full. Most of the actual dialogue, jokes, and character moments were invented during that storyboard stage, rather than being written in advance. Luke Brookshire, a writer and storyboard storyboard artist who worked on the show, later described this process as similar to how cartoons were made in the early days of animation, building the humor visually rather than on a page. That approach shaped everything about how Season 1 looks and feels. The comedy is frequently physical. Timing matters enormously. Jokes happen in the animation itself, in how long something takes, in a single held frame, in the way a character's expression changes between one drawing and the next, not just in what is being said. The storyboard-first method made SpongeBob feel looser and more alive than a scripted show typically would. The storyboard team for Season 1 included Sherm Cohen, Derek Dryman, Steve Fonte, Hillenburg himself, Chuck Klein, Jay Lender, Chris Mitchell, Mark O'Hare, Aaron Springer, Paul Tibbett, Ennio Torresan, Vincent Waller, and Eric Weiss. Several of these names would remain central to the show for years. Others would move on after the first season. Meriwether Williams joined as a writer partway through the season, with her first episode being Karate Choppers. The voice cast that Hillenburg assembled for Season 1 became one of the most recognized in animated television. Tom Kenny, who Hillenburg knew from Rocko's Modern Life, was cast as SpongeBob. Kenny had actually used a version of the SpongeBob voice for a minor character on Rocko, then forgotten how to do it. Hillenburg had to play him a video clip of that episode to remind him. When Hillenburg heard the voice again, he immediately told Nickelodeon that was the one. He did not want to hear any other actor. The network pushed for more auditions. Hillenburg refused. Bill Fagerbakke was cast as Patrick. During Fagerbakke's audition, Hillenburg played him a portion of Kenny's SpongeBob recording to help establish the dynamic between the two characters. Roger Bumpass played Squidward, describing the character as a nasally, monotone kind of person with a wide range of frustrated emotions. Clancy Brown played Mr. Krabs, building a voice that Hillenburg had described as pirate-like, based on a former manager Hillenburg had at a seafood restaurant who had a strong Maine accent. Brown added a slight Scottish quality on top of that. Doug Lawrence, who also wrote for the show under the name Mr. Lawrence, voiced Plankton. Carolyn Lawrence played Sandy Cheeks. Mary Jo Catlett played Mrs. Puff. Lori Allen played Pearl. Season 1 was received well from the moment it aired. Critics noted that the show managed to work simultaneously for children and adults. The bright colors and physical comedy for younger viewers, the layered writing and strange humor for older ones. A review in Variety described the show as smarter and stranger than most animated series of that era. A DVD Talk reviewer later called it the best animated American comedy since The Simpsons. The show won 3 Golden Reel Awards for Best Sound Editing in Television Animation during the season's run. None of that had been guaranteed. Hillenburg had spent years building toward this. The Marine Science Classroom, the unpublished comic, the Rocko Years, the Hawaiian shirt pitch in a conference room. What launched on May 1st, 1999, was the end result of a long, winding path that started with a marine biologist trying to make tide pools interesting for school children. The world of Bikini Bottom, its buildings made from flotsam, its pineapple house on Conch Street, its ridiculous fast food restaurant shaped like a lobster trap, all of that came from a man who genuinely loved the ocean and spent years studying and teaching it before he ever drew a frame of animation. The origin of the show matters because it explains something about why Season 1 feels different from most cartoons of its era. Hillenburg was not a television writer who had been assigned to create a kids show. He was someone who had spent years being genuinely fascinated by the creatures that lived at the bottom of the sea, and who had eventually found a way to put that fascination on screen in a form that millions of people could share. That foundation, built in a tide pool classroom in California, shaped through years of animation work, and finally pitched to a network with a terrarium and a Hawaiian shirt, is what everything else in Season 1 is resting on. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the first real test of whether any of it was going to work came down to a single episode, a single character walking up to a restaurant and saying the words he would say tens of thousands of times over the next 2 decades. That episode, what happened during it, and what it quietly set in motion for every story Bikini Bottom would ever tell, that is where the actual lore begins. Section 2. The pitch, the pilot, and the premiere. The recording script for Help Wanted was finished on May 12, 1997. The final storyboard was completed on June 3rd of that same year. The finished master of the episode was delivered to Nickelodeon Animation Studio on September 18, 1997. Then the episode sat. For almost 2 full years, the pilot that would eventually launch one of the most watched cartoons in history existed only on a tape inside a building in Burbank, California, waiting for the right moment to air. That gap between completion and broadcast matters because of what it reveals about how the show came to exist. Help Wanted was produced before there was a confirmed series order, before there was a time slot, before there was a schedule. The pilot was made to prove a concept, to demonstrate that the world Hillenburg had been building in his head since the tide pool days could actually function as a television show. The episode had to do everything at once: introduce the main character, establish the world, make the audience laugh, and do it all in roughly 8 minutes. The plot of Help Wanted is simple on the surface. SpongeBob wakes up on what he considers the most important day of his life, the day he is going to apply for a job at the Krusty Krab, the restaurant he has been dreaming about working at for as long as the episode implies he has been alive. He practices. He exercises by lifting a barbell made of 2 stuffed animals. He runs outside, past his neighbor Patrick, and heads straight for the Krusty Krab, telling his snail Gary as he leaves that today is the big day. He gets there. He sees the Help Wanted sign in the window, and he immediately loses his nerve. That moment, SpongeBob getting right to the door of the Krusty Krab and then backing away, saying he cannot do it, is the first real piece of character work the show does. Before a single joke lands, before the plot kicks in, the audience learns that SpongeBob is someone who wants something with his entire heart and is terrified he is not good enough to get it. Patrick talks him back into it. SpongeBob goes in. Inside, Squidward is cleaning the window. He sees SpongeBob coming and immediately tries to stop him from getting the job. The episode does not explain why Squidward dislikes SpongeBob. There is no backstory scene, no explanation delivered to the audience. Squidward simply looks at SpongeBob approaching and says, in a tone of already exhausted dread, "SpongeBob." The audience is expected to understand from that single word and that single expression that these two have a history, and that the history is not a pleasant one for Squidward. That choice, dropping the audience into relationships that already exist rather than constructing them in real time, was deliberate, and it gave the show an immediate sense of a world that had been running before the cameras arrived. Mr. Krabs is introduced quickly. He is large, he is loud, and he is immediately and obviously someone who makes decisions based entirely on what benefits himself. When Squidward tells him SpongeBob wants the job, Krabs dismisses the idea. SpongeBob is not qualified. He does not have enough experience. Krabs moves to get rid of him cleanly. He invents a fake test, telling SpongeBob that in order to join the Krusty crew, he must first go out and find a specific spatula, a hydrodynamic spatula with port and starboard attachments, and a turbo drive. This is a nonsense object. Krabs does not believe it exists. He is sending SpongeBob away to fail so that he can reject him politely and get back to his day. SpongeBob leaves immediately, running off on the mission with complete seriousness. The moment SpongeBob disappears, the episode shifts. 6 buses pull up outside the Krusty Krab and unload a mob of anchovies, small identical fish, stacked together, moving as a single screeching mass and demanding Krabby Patties. Squidward attempts to manage them. He asks for a neat single-file line. The anchovies disagree. They begin to swell and surge like a wave, a literal wall of fish pushing against everything in the restaurant. Squidward and Mr. Krabs are forced to climb the pole in the middle of the room to escape the flood. The anchovies rise around them, screaming in a high, continuous sound, the whole restaurant becoming a churning ocean of small fish. Then SpongeBob flies in through the window. He found the spatula. He is holding it, and with it, he proceeds to cook Krabby Patties at a speed that defies any reasonable explanation, flipping and stacking and serving until every anchovy in the restaurant has been fed. The mob subsides. The room empties. Krabs, still clinging to the pole, stares at the kid who just saved his restaurant. He climbs down and gives SpongeBob a name tag. The episode ends with Patrick walking in, ordering a Krabby Patty, and SpongeBob racing back into the kitchen to cook again, the resulting stream of patties launching Patrick out of the building entirely. That is the whole episode. On the surface, it is fast, simple, and physical. Under the surface, it established every single relationship that Season 1 would spend 20 episodes developing. SpongeBob wants the job more than he wants anything. Squidward resents SpongeBob's presence and always will. Mr. Krabs will accept anyone who proves useful to his restaurant and his money. Patrick exists in a category of loyalty and chaos that operates on its own logic entirely. The original 1997 version of Help Wanted had some differences from the version that eventually aired in 1999. The colors in the 1997 version are slightly different. SpongeBob appears less bright yellow, Squidward is a more vivid shade of cyan, and Mr. Krabs has noticeably pink eyelids. The opening credits were placed differently. Steven Hillenburg is credited as director in the 1997 version, while the 1999 version credits him as storyboard director. The name Patrick is misspelled in the 1997 credits as Partik, and Bill Fagerbake's last name is misspelled as Faberbake. These were corrected for the broadcast version. The 1997 master was not something the general public ever saw. It existed on a VHS tape called The Best of Nicktoons 1998, distributed only to Nickelodeon Animation Studio employees. That original airing was rediscovered and uploaded to the Internet Archive decades later, surfacing publicly for the first time, long after the show had already become a global phenomenon. In April 1998, 1998, the original pilot was screened publicly for the first time at an event in Austin, Texas, shown alongside the premieres of Cat Dog and Action League Now. It was not yet a television premiere. The actual television broadcast came on May 1st, 1999. The premiere happened at an unusual hour and in an unusual context. SpongeBob did not launch on a Saturday morning. Help Wanted, Reef Blower, and Tea at the Tree Dome aired on a Friday evening, immediately after the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards ceremony at 9:30 in the evening Eastern Time. This was the third time Nickelodeon had used the post-Kids' Choice Awards slot to debut a new cartoon. The first had been The Angry Beavers in 1997, the second, Cat Dog, in 1998. The slot was a gift. The Kids' Choice Awards reliably pulled a large audience, and anything that aired right after it inherited that attention. The show had originally been set to lose that slot to a series based on a short from the Nickelodeon anthology show Kablam, but plans for that show collapsed when its creator left the studio. SpongeBob took the opening. The result was 6.9 million viewers for the premiere night. 3.6 million of those were children between 2 and 11 years old. The other 3.3 million were teenagers and adults. For a first episode of an unknown cartoon, those numbers were strong. Reef Blower, the second short in that premiere package, was something genuinely unusual for a network cartoon. The episode has no dialogue at all. Not reduced dialogue, none. SpongeBob tries to blow a shell out of his yard with a leaf blower designed for water. The shell goes into Squidward's yard. Things escalate. The entire ocean ends up getting sucked into the machine and then expelled in a catastrophic burst. Squidward is left dry, underwater, staring at the empty ocean floor, while his yard is now spotless. The episode communicates everything through movement, timing, and expression alone. It recalled the kind of visual comedy that Buster Keaton and early Looney Tunes built their reputations on. Jokes that live entirely in the image rather than the words. Tea at the Tree Dome introduced Sandy Cheeks, the squirrel from Texas who lives inside an air dome at the bottom of the ocean. SpongeBob meets her when she is out in the ocean in an air suit, doing karate on a giant clam. He tries to impress her. She invites him to her tree dome for tea. He accepts without thinking about the obvious problem, which is that her home is full of air rather than water, and he is a sea creature who needs water to survive. Sandy does not know this is a problem because she assumes everyone breathes air. SpongeBob does not mention it because he is trying to seem impressive and capable. He shrivels up. He continues smiling and making conversation as his body dries out. Patrick comes to check on him and also shrivels up. The two of them sit there slowly dying rather than admit they need water. The episode ends with Sandy giving them both fish bowls full of water to wear on their heads, establishing the rule that sea creatures need water helmets when visiting Sandy's tree dome, a rule the show would follow consistently throughout season 1 and largely stick to for years afterward. The official ongoing weekly series began on July 17, 1999, with the episode pairing Bubble Stand and Ripped Pants. The July 17th date is often listed as the show's official premiere for this reason. The May 1 airing was a sneak peek, and the re-airing of Help Wanted happened on July 24, 1999, packaged alongside Reef Blower and Tea at the Tree Dome to establish it properly as part of the regular run. The network officially announced the series in December 1998, with 13 episodes planned at the time. The season ultimately grew to 20 episodes. It ran all the way through to March 3, 2001, making season 1 a span of nearly 2 years from first broadcast to final episode. That extended broadcast window, nearly 2 years for one season, was not unusual for Nickelodeon at the time. Production schedules meant that episodes rolled out gradually, and the network spaced them across a long calendar. The last 2 episodes of season 1, Hooky and Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2, aired in 2001, technically in a different century from where the season started. In other regions like Australia, Canada, and Latin America, those final episodes had already aired in 2000. The cast assembled for season 1 was not full of recognizable celebrity voices. Hillenburg was clear about not wanting stunt casting. He believed the characters should be built by voice artists who could find the truth of the character rather than by famous names dropping in for a paycheck. The core ensemble was Tom Kenny as SpongeBob and Gary, Bill Fagerbakke as Patrick, Roger Bumpass as Squidward, Clancy Brown as Mr. Krabs, Doug Lawrence as Plankton, Jill Talley as Karen, Carolyn Lawrence as Sandy, Mary Jo Catlett as Mrs. Puff, and Lori Allen as Pearl. The show did have guest stars in season 1. The first were Ernest Borgnine and Tim Conway, who appeared as Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy in the episode of the same name. Brian Doyle Murray voiced the Flying Dutchman in Scaredy Pants. Charles Nelson Riley appeared as the Dirty Bubble in Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2. The rock band Ghastly Ones performed a live musical number in Scaredy Pants, making them the first guest stars to appear as themselves in the show. Season 1 was entirely animated using traditional cell animation, every frame hand-painted onto transparent plastic sheets, dried and layered. layered. After season 1, the show moved to digital methods. The slightly warmer, slightly less precise visual quality of those early episodes is a direct result of the cell process. Each frame took more time and physical labor than anything that came after. Paul Tibbitt later described the process as doing things the old-fashioned way, where every single cell had to be part painted, allowed to dry, and then worked on again for the next color. The show was storyboarded rather than scripted. Writers produced short 2-page outlines, and the storyboard artists built the actual episodes from those, adding dialogue and jokes as they drew. This gave season 1 a quality that is hard to describe precisely, but easy to feel. A looseness, a willingness to let a visual joke run longer than a scripted show would, a comfort with silence and physical comedy that most network cartoons of that era did not have. Season 1 won 3 Golden Reel Awards for Best Sound Editing in Television Animation during its initial run, with the episodes Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, Pickles, and Karate Choppers each contributing to those wins. In 2001, Rock Bottom and Arg also won Golden Reel Awards, while Fools in April and Neptune's Spatula were nominated. Critics responded well from the start. The review in Variety called the show smarter and stranger than most animated series of that period. A reviewer at DVD Talk called it the best animated American comedy since The Simpsons. The Washington Post, reviewing the pilot years later in 2009, noted that the style and polish of Help Wanted were almost fully formed from the very first episode, that very little about the show's voice needed to develop because it arrived essentially complete. That observation carries something worth sitting with. Most television shows take time to find themselves. Pilots are often rough. Characters take a few episodes to settle into who they are. The world needs time to build. SpongeBob Season 1 did not have that problem in the same way. The pilot episode introduced SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, Mr. Krabs, and the Krusty Krab, and every one of them behaved in ways that were recognizably themselves. The relationships were already there. The comedy was already doing what it would keep doing. The world was already the world. The gap between the 1997 production of Help Wanted and its 1999 broadcast meant that by the time the first episode aired, the team behind it had been living with these characters for 2 years. They knew who SpongeBob was. They knew what made him funny, and what made him something more than funny. The premiere was not the beginning of figuring that out. The figuring out had already happened. What aired on May 1st, 1999 was the result of all of it. 6.9 million people watched that first night. Most of them had no idea what they were watching yet. The world of Bikini Bottom was now on television. A pineapple on Conch Street, a restaurant shaped like a lobster trap, a squid who played clarinet badly and hated everyone around him, a starfish who lived under a rock, a crab who loved money more than most things, and a sponge who just wanted to flip patties. That was all in place from night 1. What season 1 spent the next 20 episodes doing was filling in the edges of that world, the history, the mythology, the rules, and the characters who made it feel like somewhere real. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The buildings of Bikini Bottom, who built them, what they were made of, and why the whole underwater city felt like nowhere else on television. That story runs deeper than most people ever stop to look at it. Section 3. Cell animation. The only season made the old-fashioned way. Every single frame of season 1 was painted by hand, not drawn by hand. Animated shows are always drawn by hand at some stage. Painted. Each individual image in every episode of season 1 existed as a physical object, a transparent plastic sheet with colors applied to it one layer at a time, left to dry between coats, stacked with other sheets to build up the complete picture. Those sheets are called cells. The process of making animation this way is called cell animation, and season 1 of SpongeBob SquarePants is the only season of the entire show that used it. Every season after season 1 switched to digital methods. The physical cells went away. The drying time went away. The particular warmth and weight that comes from paint on plastic went away with it. This matters more than it might seem at first. The look of golden era SpongeBob, the slightly softer edges, the colors that feel a little richer and more handmade, the sense that the images have some weight behind them, comes directly from that process. When people talk about the way early SpongeBob looks and feel different from later seasons, they are usually pointing at something real, and part of what they are pointing at is this. The animation of season 1 was made physically, in a way the show would never return to. The production pipeline for season 1 worked in 2 locations, separated by roughly 10,000 miles. The creative work, the writing, the storyboarding, the voice recording, the direction, happened at Nickelodeon Animation Studio in Burbank, California. The actual animation happened at Rough Draft Studios Korea in Seoul, South Korea. These 2 locations had to work in close coordination throughout the production of every episode, and that pipeline had been in place since the very beginning. Rough Draft Korea animated the pilot episode Help Wanted, and they went on to animate essentially every episode of the series for decades, with only a small number of exceptions. The California team would produce a complete storyboard for each episode, a sequence of drawings that laid out every scene, every shot, every character movement, and most of the dialogue and jokes. Those storyboards were then sent to Korea, where the animation team used them as the blueprint for everything they drew. The Korea team animated each scene by hand, colored the frames on computers, and painted the backgrounds. When the animation was finished, it came back to California, where it was edited, timed, and had music and sound effects added before being delivered to Nickelodeon for broadcast. During season 1 specifically, the coloring step, the part that would later be done digitally, was still done by applying paint to physical cells. Paul Tibbitt, who worked on the show from its early days and eventually became executive producer, described this years later. The first season of SpongeBob was done the old-fashioned way on cells, and every cell had to be part painted, left to dry, paint some other colors. The digital way of doing things means mistakes can be corrected quickly, he said. The cell process did not allow for that. Once paint was dry, it was dry. The scale of what this required is worth thinking about. Animation runs at a standard rate of 24 frames per second for film, though television animation often uses fewer unique drawings by holding certain frames across multiple seconds to reduce cost. Even so, a single 11-minute segment of a SpongeBob episode represents thousands of individual frames. Each of those frames in season 1 was a physical object that existed in the world, a painted cell, stacked and stored and photographed. The logistics of producing an entire season this way, while also meeting broadcast deadlines, were enormous. The shift to digital that happened starting in season 2 was not primarily an artistic decision, it was a practical one. Digital methods were faster, cheaper to correct, and did not require the same physical handling and drying time. The output could look very similar to cell animation, and for most viewers, especially children watching on standard television sets in the early 2000s, the difference was not obvious, but it was there. There is a particular quality to cell animation that animators and close observers have described for decades. The colors have a slightly different saturation. The lines have a slightly different feel. The whole image has a quality that people sometimes describe as warmth, though that word is doing a lot of work. What they mean is that the image carries some trace of the physical process that made it. Paint is not a perfect medium. It has slight variations in how it covers a surface, slight differences in how it dries, slight inconsistencies from one cell to the next. Those imperfections are not visible as mistakes. They register as texture. The backgrounds of season 1 were also painted by hand, and they have a quality that matches. The deep greens and blues of the ocean floor, the sandy textures of jellyfish fields, the warm interior lighting of the Krusty Krab, all of it was created by background painters working on physical surfaces. The backgrounds of early SpongeBob have a richness that rewards being looked at slowly, something that was harder to appreciate on small televisions in 1999 than it is on modern screens decades later. The storyboard first production method shaped the animation in specific ways. Because the writers did not produce full scripts, the storyboard artists had significant creative freedom in how they visualized each scene. A 2-page outline describing a basic story concept gave the storyboard artist enormous room to decide how long a joke ran, where the camera was, what the character's face did in a given moment. The comedy of season 1 is deeply visual in ways that scripted shows rarely are, and that visual quality comes directly from artists making decisions with pencils rather than writers making decisions with words. Hillenburg was emphatic about this approach. He had learned it on Rocko's Modern Life, where Joe Murray had established the same storyboard-first method. Hillenburg believed that animation should be built by animators, that the humor of a cartoon should emerge from the drawn image rather than being predetermined on a page. Nickelodeon was moving in the opposite direction at the time, increasingly favoring scripted shows where the dialogue was locked before any drawings were made. Hillenburg pushed back. SpongeBob kept the outline and storyboard method throughout his tenure on the show. The team of storyboard directors and artists for season 1 included a remarkable concentration of talent. Sherm Cohen, Derek Dryman, Steve Fonte, Hillenburg himself, Chuck Klein, Jay Lender, Chris Mitchell, Mark O'Hare, Aaron Springer, Paul Tibbitt, Ennio Torreson, Vincent Waller, and Eric Wiesa all worked on the storyboards for season 1. Several of these people would shape the show's creative identity for years. Aaron Springer and Jay Lender in particular would become central contributors to what fans now call the golden era of the show, producing some of the most celebrated episodes in seasons 2 and 3. The voice recording for each episode happened at Nickelodeon Animation Studio in California before the animation was sent to Korea. The voice cast recorded their lines without seeing finished animation. They worked from storyboards, reading dialogue, and performing reactions to drawn images rather than completed scenes. Tom Kenny, Bill Fagerbakke, Roger Bumpass, Clancy Brown, and the rest of the core cast built their performances this way from the very beginning. The performances came first. The animation was built around them. This order, voices voices before animation is standard practice for American animation and has been for decades. The animators in Korea used the voice recordings as timing guides, building the movement of each character's mouth and body to match the rhythm and energy of what the actors had already delivered. When Roger Bumpass found a particular note of exhausted contempt for Squidward, the animators in Korea were working to bring that reading to life in the drawings rather than the other way around. Tom Kenny's performance as SpongeBob in Season 1 established the entire template for the character. SpongeBob's voice is high, genuinely enthusiastic, and slightly nasal, not aggressively cartoonish, but operating in a register that feels distinct from ordinary human speech, without veering into pure absurdity. The laugh, which sounds like a series of sharp, high honking sounds, was developed deliberately. The show's casting crew wanted SpongeBob to have a unique, memorable laugh in the tradition of Popeye and Woody Woodpecker, comic characters whose laughs were as recognizable as their faces. Kenny delivered something that landed in that tradition. Fagerbach as Patrick is almost exactly opposite. Where SpongeBob is quick and energetic and slightly anxious, Patrick is slow, low, and entirely unbothered. The contrast between their voices is part of what makes their friendship work on a purely sonic level. They sound like they come from different registers of existence, which is exactly right for two characters who experience the world in such different ways. Roger Bumpass describes Squidward in terms of texture, a nasally, monotone delivery with wide room for frustration, sarcasm, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from believing you deserve better than everything around you. Bumpass found the character interesting specifically because of that emotional range. Squidward cannot be played as simply angry because simple anger would not be funny. The comedy requires that the anger pass through a layer of wounded dignity first. Clancy Brown built Mr. Krabs starting from Hillenburg's description of a pirate-like voice, inspired by a real manager Hillenburg had worked under at a seafood restaurant in his past. That manager had a strong Maine accent that reminded Hillenburg of old pirate movies. Brown took that starting point and added a slight Scottish quality to it, creating a voice that feels genuinely nautical in a way that is hard to place exactly, but immediately recognizable. The production of Season 1 ran into at least one significant complication that affected how the season has been remembered. The pilot episode, Help Wanted, used a licensed song, Tiny Tim's Livin' in the Sunlight, Lovin' in the Moonlight, during the climactic scene where SpongeBob cooks Krabby Patties for the anchovy mob. When it came time to release Season 1 on DVD in 2003, Nickelodeon chose not to include Help Wanted in the set. According to Derek Dryman, the network did not want to pay Tiny Tim's estate for the DVD rights to the song. The result was that the official Season 1 DVD, released in North America on October 28, 2003, started with Bubble Stand and Ripped Pants rather than the actual first episode. Help Wanted was not completely absent from physical releases. The German edition of the Season 1 DVD included it. It later appeared as a bonus feature on the Season 3 DVD set in 2005. It was eventually restored to its proper position in the release called The First 100 Episodes. But for years, anyone buying the standard Season 1 DVD set in North America got a version of the season that was missing its own beginning. The Season 1 DVD set was released in North America on October 28, 2003. Region 2 releases followed on November 7, 2005. Region 4 on November 30, 2006. The sets were produced by Paramount Home Entertainment and Nickelodeon. Critics reviewing the DVD sets were consistently positive, with several noting that the show held up extremely well, even several years after initial broadcast. Season 1 ran from May 1, 1999 through March 3, 2001, and consisted of 20 half-hour episodes. Almost every episode was divided into two 11-minute segments rather than a single 22-minute story. Hillenburg made this structural choice deliberately. He believed SpongeBob worked better in shorter formats, that the energy and absurdity of the show were easier to sustain across 11 minutes than across a full half hour. The only episode in Season 1 with 3 segments rather than 2 was the premiere itself, which paired Help Wanted, Reef Blower, and Tea at the Tree Dome. A small number of scenes in Season 1 used early digital animation rather than cell animation. The bouncing house in the episode Jellyfish Jam is one example, a sequence that used digital techniques because the movement required would have been extremely difficult to achieve consistently with hand-painted cells. These moments were exceptions in a season that was otherwise entirely cell-based, and they are subtle enough that most viewers watching at the time would not have noticed the difference. The cell animation of Season 1 was not simply a technical method. It was a set of physical conditions that shaped everything about how the show was made and what the show looked like. The warm, slightly imperfect quality of those early images came from paint drying on plastic in a studio in Seoul. The slightly softer backgrounds came from painters working on physical surfaces in California. The whole visual identity of what people now call classic SpongeBob was built, frame by by hand. After season 1, that process ended. The digital transition that began in season 2 made the show faster to produce and easier to adjust, and the animation remained excellent for years afterward. The show did not get worse because it went digital, but something specific to season 1 was left behind when the cells were put away. A quality embedded in the physical nature of the images themselves, in the paint and the plastic and the drying time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one more thing about how season 1 was produced that rarely gets discussed alongside the animation process, and it shaped the show just as much as anything that happened at a drawing table. The music of season 1, where it came from, how it was chosen, and why certain tracks became permanently fused in the memory of an entire generation, has a production story just as specific and just as deliberate as anything else about the season. Section 4. Bikini Bottom, a world built from flotsam and marine lore. The city of Bikini Bottom did not arrive fully formed from nowhere. Every detail of the place, the shape of the buildings, the layout of the streets, the kinds of creatures who lived there, the way the whole underwater world operated under rules that were almost, but not quite like the surface world, came from decisions that Steven Hillenburg made deliberately, drawing on years of studying and teaching actual marine science. Bikini Bottom is an invented city, but it was invented by someone who knew what the real ocean looked like and made specific choices about how to bend that reality into something that could hold a cartoon. The location of Bikini Bottom is established clearly within the show. The city sits at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, directly beneath Bikini Atoll, a real place, a small island that is part of the Marshall Islands, located roughly halfway between Hawaii and the Philippines. Hillenburg confirmed this placement himself. The show provides evidence for it in multiple ways across its run. When Sandy leaves Bikini Bottom in one episode, she flies east across the Pacific Ocean toward Texas, which is the correct direction from that part of the Pacific. A computer game connected to the show has a fish character state directly that Bikini Bottom is in the Pacific Ocean. In the first SpongeBob movie, a camera pullback from a scene set in Bikini Bottom rises up through the water and out into the sky above the Pacific. The name Bikini Bottom is a direct reference to Bikini Atoll. The word bikini itself comes from the Marshallese word pikini, meaning surface of coconuts or land of coconuts. The atoll is real, small, and historically significant in ways that have nothing to do with cartoon sea sponges. It was the site of nuclear weapons testing by the United States in the 1940s and 1950s. Hillenburg was aware of this history. The choice to set the show beneath that specific island was deliberate, and it came from someone who had spent years thinking seriously about the ocean and what human activity had done to it. There was an early concept during season 1's development that briefly considered building the nuclear testing history directly into the show's lore. The concept involved the idea that the entire surface world had been destroyed in a post-apocalyptic war, with Bikini Bottom as one of the only places where life continued. This concept was scrapped early in the development process and never made it into the show proper. The nuclear history of Bikini Atoll remained present only in the name and the placement. The center of Bikini Bottom, as established across season 1, operates like a small American city. There are large buildings made of metal downtown. There are businesses, restaurants, stores, and services. There is a police department, a court, a hospital, schools, and a boating school. Moving outward from the city center into the suburban areas, the architecture becomes less uniform and stranger. This is where the main characters live, and this is where the show's visual identity gets most distinctive. The street where most of season 1 takes place is Conch Street. It runs from the downtown area of Bikini Bottom out through the suburbs, and along it sit the three houses that anchor the show: SpongeBob's Pineapple, Squidward's Easter Island Head, and Patrick's Rock. The Krusty Krab is nearby, with the Chum Bucket directly across the street from it. The Reef Cinema is also on Conch Street. The road intersects with Barnacle Road and Coral Avenue. Anchor Way is close by. SpongeBob's house is a pineapple. This is not explained or justified within the show. It is simply where he lives, and the show treats it as entirely unremarkable. Hillenburg chose the pineapple specifically. In many cultures, particularly in parts of the Caribbean and the American South, pineapples at the entrance to a home are a traditional symbol of welcome and hospitality. SpongeBob is the most welcoming character in the show's world, someone who meets every person and every situation with open enthusiasm. His house reflecting that cultural symbol was a deliberate choice. Early concept art for the show considered other objects for SpongeBob's home. A treasure chest and a disco ball were both explored as options before the pineapple was settled on. The address of the pineapple is 124 Conch Street. The exterior is covered in the diamond pattern texture of a real pineapple skin. The interior, as seen across season 1 and beyond, contains a living room, a kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom, and a library. The pineapple grows from an actual root in the ground beneath it, as revealed in the Season 1 episode Home Sweet Pineapple, where the house is eaten by a colony of nematodes and reduced to nothing, only for SpongeBob to find a tiny seed left behind, which he plants, and which grows overnight back into a full pineapple house. The house has been destroyed completely on multiple occasions across the show's run, and always regenerates or is rebuilt by the following episode. Squidward's house is built to resemble an Easter Island head, one of the massive stone-carved faces found on Easter Island in the real Pacific Ocean. It sits between SpongeBob's pineapple and Patrick's rock on Conch Street, placing Squidward permanently at the geographic and emotional center of the neighborhood dynamic. The house has large stone eye sockets, a heavy brow, and a shape that implies age and permanence. Squidward has a fenced garden in the back that appears in several episodes. There is a window on the side of the house that faces SpongeBob's pineapple. The placement of that window matters. It means Squidward can see SpongeBob's house from inside his own, and SpongeBob can see Squidward's. Proximity is the engine of much of Season 1's conflict. Patrick's house is a rock, a large, brown, somewhat dome-shaped rock sitting on the ground. The inside, when shown in most episodes, is a rounded space filled with sand. Patrick spends much of his time either sitting on top of the rock or sleeping under it. The rock lifts on a large hinge when Patrick opens it. In some episodes, a more detailed interior is shown. Patrick has decorated it, or specific objects appear inside, but the default state of Patrick's home is a rounded sandy space beneath a large stone. He has no garden. He has no yard to speak of. He has a rock. The Krusty Krab sits at a slightly further distance from the residential cluster on Conch Street, but is close enough that SpongeBob can walk there every day for work, which he does across the entirety of Season 1. The building is designed to look like a lobster trap, the kind used by real fishermen to catch real lobsters. This was a deliberate marine reference from Hillenburg. The restaurant is owned by a crab named Mr. Krabs. He runs a business from inside a lobster trap. The visual joke is quiet, built into the architecture, and Hillenburg put it there intentionally. The interior of the Krusty Krab contains the dining area managed by Squidward, the kitchen where SpongeBob works, and Mr. Krabs' office at the back where he keeps his money and does his counting. Directly across the street from the Krusty Krab is the Chum Bucket. The contrast between the two buildings is immediate and visual. The Krusty Krab is large, warm, and busy. The Chum Bucket is small, metallic, cold-looking, and almost always empty of customers. Plankton runs the Chum Bucket with his computer wife Karen. The Chum Bucket's food is made from chum, a mixture of fish parts and other scraps used in real fishing as bait. The Bikini Bottom residents will not eat it. The restaurant has essentially no customers across Season 1 or any subsequent season. It exists primarily as a base from which Plankton launches his various attempts to steal the Krabby Patty formula and destroy Mr. Krabs. Beyond the immediate Conch Street neighborhood, Season 1 establishes several other significant locations that become recurring parts of the show's geography. Jellyfish Fields is where SpongeBob and Patrick spend much of their leisure time. It is an open area outside the main city, filled with jellyfish, creatures that drift through the underwater air and can be caught with nets, which is one of SpongeBob and Patrick's favorite activities. The jellyfish in Bikini Bottom produce a jelly that can be eaten, similar to normal jelly, and SpongeBob is an avid collector. Jellyfish Fields is vast enough to get lost in, as several Season 1 episodes demonstrate. It sits past the Krusty Krab and the Chum Bucket when moving away from the city center. Goo Lagoon is the beach of Bikini Bottom, an underwater beach, with sand and water within the larger underwater environment. The characters swim at Goo Lagoon, sunbathe at Goo Lagoon, and treat it the way Surface World characters would treat any beach. The absurdity of an underwater beach is entirely consistent with how Bikini Bottom operates. It is a world that mirrors surface human life in almost every way, but displaced to the ocean floor and populated by sea creatures who have adopted human customs without fully noticing how strange that is. Sandy Cheeks lives in a dome of air inside the ocean. Her home, called the Tree Dome, is a large dome structure that maintains a completely dry, air-filled interior containing grass, a large tree that she sleeps in, and a front door that drains the water when opened. Sandy is from Texas and is a scientist and an athlete. She came to Bikini Bottom to study the creatures there. Her presence in the neighborhood establishes one of Season 1's running physical rules. Sea creatures need to wear water-filled helmets when visiting Sandy's Tree Dome, and Sandy wears an airsuit when she leaves it. This rule is applied consistently across Season 1 in ways that later seasons occasionally let slide. Mrs. Puff's boating school appears in Season 1 and becomes a recurring setting throughout the show. It is where SpongeBob attempts, repeatedly and unsuccessfully, to pass his boating exam and earn his license to drive a boat. The boats in Bikini Bottom function like cars in the surface world. SpongeBob can cook a Krabby Patty with perfect precision and catch jellyfish with graceful skill, but he cannot operate a boat without causing catastrophic destruction. This is one of Season 1's running dynamics, and Mrs. Puff, a pufferfish who runs the school, school and physically puffs up with stress whenever SpongeBob crashes, is one of the first recurring supporting characters the season introduces. Shady Shoals Rest Home is where Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy live when SpongeBob and Patrick discover them in the Season 1 episode Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. It is a retirement home, a place for elderly Bikini Bottom residents, and the presence of two aging superheroes inside it is treated as completely normal by the other residents. The retirement home has a cafeteria, common areas, and the general atmosphere of a place where people have settled in to wait. The architecture of Bikini Bottom as a whole is described in the show as being made primarily from flotsam and jetsam, debris that has sunk from the surface world to the ocean floor. Buildings in the downtown area are more conventional in their construction, made from metal and stone. In the suburban areas, the structures are built from whatever was available: a pineapple, a rock, an ancient stone carving. The world is assembled from scraps and found objects, which is consistent with how real ocean floors work. Things fall from the surface. They accumulate. Creatures make homes inside them. Hillenburg's marine science background shaped every layer of this. The idea of sea creatures living inside the debris of the surface world is not pure invention. It is an exaggerated version of a real ecological relationship. Hermit crabs use shells and other objects as homes. Various sea creatures nest inside sunken objects on the ocean floor. Hillenburg took this reality, pushed it into cartoon scale, and built an entire city around it. The clouds in Bikini Bottom are shaped like flowers rather than the rounded shapes of surface clouds. The weather can change. It rains, there are storms, and in some episodes there is even snow, explained as coming from nearby icebergs. The sun is visible from the ocean floor in ways that real physics would not allow at Bikini Bottom's implied depth, but the show operates on the logic that warmth and light exist down there the same way they exist above. Sandy once described Bikini Bottom as crowded and smoggy in a song, a description that matches Los Angeles more than it matches a small ocean floor town, and that comparison is deliberate since the show was made in Southern California by people who knew that geography well. The population of Bikini Bottom shifts wildly depending on the episode. Mrs. Puff in one episode states that the city is home to millions of people. Other episodes suggest a population of only a few hundred. One episode, involving SpongeBob opening a new Pretty Patty's restaurant, draws 46,853 customers in a single day, which implies a surrounding population large enough to sustain that number. Hillenburg confirmed in interviews that Bikini Bottom is a large city, but the show never fixed a specific number and never needed to. The population is whatever the story requires. What the world of Bikini Bottom is, underneath all of it, is a place that feels genuinely inhabited. The buildings have histories, the streets have names, the residents have routines and relationships and preferences. SpongeBob goes to work every morning. Squidward practices his clarinet. Patrick sleeps. Sandy runs experiments. Plankton schemes. The world turns at its own pace, operating on its own logic, and every element of it was designed by someone who had spent years thinking about the real ocean and what lives there. The city sitting at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, built from the ruins of the surface world, full of sea creatures who act like humans without knowing how strange that is Bikini Bottom, and Season 1 is where all of it was established for the first time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Krusty Krab sits at the center of most of what Season 1 is actually about. The restaurant, the food it sells, and the secret at the heart of that food all drive more of the show's plots and relationships than any other single element. What the Krabby Patty actually is, where it came from, and why a tiny one-eyed creature across the street has spent decades trying to steal its recipe, that runs deeper into Bikini Bottom's history than Season 1 ever fully shows. Section 5. The Krabby Patty and the Secret Formula. Introduced in Season 1, the Krabby Patty appears in the very first episode of the show. In Help Wanted, before SpongeBob has even been hired, the entire plot hinges on a mob of anchovies flooding the Krusty Krab demanding Krabby Patties. The food is the crisis. The food is the solution. SpongeBob earns his job by cooking enough of them fast enough to feed every anchovy in the building. The Krabby Patty is present from the first 8 minutes of the series, and its importance to Bikini Bottom, to the economy, to the social order, to the daily lives of the people who live there, gets established before a single episode has fully ended. The Krabby Patty is a burger, specifically a meatless burger. Stephen Hillenburg was clear about this from the beginning. Series animator Vincent Waller confirmed it directly. There is absolutely no meat in the Krabby Patty, and there never has been. No animal product of any kind. The patty itself is entirely plant-based. Hillenburg built this into the show's foundation deliberately, and it connects to the broader logic of Bikini Bottom, a city populated by fish and sea creatures, where depicting those same creatures eating each other as food would have been a different and darker kind of show entirely. The Krusty Krab does not serve fish. The writer and voice actor Doug Lawrence, who plays Plankton, Plankton, explained that the show's writers were not allowed to depict fish as food or show fish eating other fish. The one exception in the entire city is the chum bucket, where Plankton's menu consists of chum, fish scraps used as bait in the real world, which is why nobody in Bikini Bottom will eat there. Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob, once joked that Krabby Patties are hummus. The joke stuck around because it captures something true about how the show handles the food. The Krabby Patty is beloved, celebrated, and treated by the citizens of Bikini Bottom as the greatest thing they have ever tasted, and its actual contents remain permanently unknown. The standard Krabby Patty's ingredients are established in the Season 1 episode Pickles. SpongeBob recites the correct assembly order when his confidence is shaken, and he is trying to remember how to build one properly. The order, from bottom to top, is bottom bun, patty, lettuce, cheese, onion, tomato, ketchup, mustard, pickles, top bun. This is treated in the episode as precise and important. Getting the order wrong, or leaving something out, is presented as a serious failure. The episode's entire conflict begins when a customer named Bubble Bass claims that SpongeBob left the pickles off his Krabby Patty, shattering SpongeBob's confidence so completely that he cannot remember how to do anything at all, including basic tasks like getting dressed or making a bowl of cereal. The grill temperature for cooking a Krabby Patty is established in other episodes as needing to be exactly 298 degrees Fahrenheit. The patty must be flipped on the grill and not burned. SpongeBob's skill as a fry cook is described throughout Season 1 as exceptional. He is not just adequate at the job, he is genuinely gifted at it in a way that Mr. Krabs recognizes from the first day and that forms the foundation of the entire Krusty Krab's success. The secret formula is something different from the basic ingredients. The bun, the lettuce, the cheese, the condiments, those are visible and known. The secret formula refers specifically to whatever is inside the patty itself. That ingredient, or combination of ingredients, is what makes the Krabby Patty taste the way it does, and it is what Plankton has been trying to steal since the beginning of the show. The secret formula is first mentioned by name in the Season 1 episode Plankton. In that episode, Plankton's entire scheme revolves around getting his hands on it. The formula at this point in Season 1 exists as a concept, something that is referenced, something that Plankton wants, something that Mr. Krabs guards, rather than a physical object. Its first appearance as an actual physical thing, a piece of paper inside a bottle, comes in a later episode. In Season 1, the formula is mostly an idea. What the episode Plankton establishes is the obsession, the rivalry, and the basic geography of the conflict. Plankton across the street, staring at the Krusty Krab, wanting what is inside it. The confirmed ingredients of the Krabby Patty's secret patty that have been revealed across the show's run include flour, barnacle shavings, and turmeric, which are mentioned in one later episode. Salt is identified as an ingredient in another. In an episode where the formula is briefly seen on paper, the writing is pure gibberish, done deliberately, according to Vincent Waller, to make sure the audience could never simply read the answer off the screen. The true formula has never been revealed in full, and Hillenburg's position was that it never would be. Some fans and commentators have pointed toward the theory that the secret formula contains nothing special at all, that it is a fiction Mr. Krabs invented to give Plankton something to chase, keeping his rival focused on a non-existent prize rather than actually competing in the restaurant business. This theory is not confirmed as canon within the show. Hillenburg never stated it was the answer. Waller never confirmed it. The writers have kept the mystery intact deliberately, and the theory, however logical it might seem from the outside, remains a fan interpretation rather than an established fact. What the show does confirm is that the Krabby Patty was created by both Mr. Krabs and Plankton together. This backstory is expanded in a later episode called Friend or Foe, which reveals that Krabs and Plankton were once childhood friends who tried to start a restaurant business together. Their partnership fell apart, and the Krabby Patty emerged from the wreckage of it, an accidental creation, made when Krabs knocked over a combination of ingredients and discovered that the result was the perfect burger. Plankton left with nothing, and has been trying to take the formula ever since. This history is not shown in Season 1, but the rivalry it produced runs through every Plankton episode in the season and forms the backbone of one of the show's longest-running conflicts. Season 1's treatment of the Krabby Patty as an almost sacred object is consistent and deliberate. In the first SpongeBob movie, Mr. Krabs delivers the line that the Krabby Patty is what ties everyone together, that without it there would be a complete breakdown of social order. That line was written years after Season 1, but it accurately describes how the food functions even in the earliest episodes. The Krusty Krab's success depends entirely on the Krabby Patty. Bikini Bottom's social fabric runs through the restaurant. SpongeBob's entire identity as a character is built around his ability to make the burger perfectly. In the episode Just One Bite, it is revealed that the Krusty Krab has a patty vault, a room where Krabby Patties are stored. It is also established in that episode that that the burgers are addictive. Squidward secretly eats one, then cannot stop, eventually jumping into the patty vault and consuming hundreds of them. SpongeBob warns him beforehand that if a person eats too many, the nutrients go straight to their thighs and they explode. This happens to Squidward. The Krabby Patty is not just delicious, it is physically overwhelming in large quantities, a property that applies to characters throughout the show whenever the food is consumed in extreme amounts. The Krusty Krab itself charges modest prices. According to information established across the show, a standard Krabby Patty costs around $1, though the price shifts between episodes. Employees pay less, 25 cents. If the Krusty Krab operates as a fine dining establishment in certain episodes, the price rises to $25. Mr. Krabs adjusts his prices based on whatever will make him the most money in any given situation, which is entirely consistent with his character throughout Season 1 and beyond. The Krabby Patty's cultural weight in Bikini Bottom is established through repetition across Season 1. The food appears in almost every episode in some form. Characters talk about it, crave it, fight over it, and in some cases, dedicate their entire existence to getting it. The Chum Bucket stands as a permanent reminder of what Bikini Bottom would look like without it. An empty restaurant selling food nobody wants, run by a creature who understands the formula's commercial value without understanding why the food actually matters to people. The secret formula itself is kept in a safe inside the Krusty Krab. In one later episode, it is revealed that SpongeBob is the only person who knows the combination to that safe, and that he has tied the combination to a specific memory involving Squidward so he will not forget it. In another episode, Squidward reveals to Plankton that the secret formula can actually be found at Mr. Krabs' house, under his mattress, suggesting that Krabs moves it periodically for safety. The formula has been temporarily stolen on several occasions across the show's run, most significantly in the first SpongeBob movie, where Plankton's Plan Z succeeds in taking it, and he uses it to take over the world. Every theft has eventually been reversed. What Season 1 establishes about the Krabby Patty and the secret formula is the foundation for everything that comes after. The food is real and beloved and tastes like nothing else. The formula is real and protected, and nobody outside of Krabs and SpongeBob knows what is in it. Plankton wants it with an intensity that defines his entire existence. SpongeBob can make it perfectly every time, and that ability is his greatest gift and the source of everything his life in Bikini Bottom is built on. The secret stays secret. Season 1 sets that rule, and the show keeps it. Every plan Plankton runs in Season 1 fails. Every attempt to steal or copy or extract the formula ends with Plankton back in the Chum Bucket, staring across the street at the Krusty Krab, already planning the next approach. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That dynamic, Plankton scheming and failing, Krabs protecting and profiting, SpongeBob cooking, and never fully understanding the stakes of what he holds, runs through Season 1 like a current beneath everything else. And to understand it fully requires going back to where Plankton himself came from, who Karen is, and what the Chum Bucket actually represents in the world of Bikini Bottom. Section 6. Plankton, Karen, and the Chum Bucket. The rivalry established Sheldon J. Plankton is 1 millimeter tall. That detail is not incidental. The entire character is built around the gap between how small he is and how large his ambitions are. Plankton wants to run the most successful restaurant in Bikini Bottom. He wants to steal the most closely guarded recipe in the city. He wants to defeat Mr. Krabs, take over the Krusty Krab's customer base, and ultimately, in his most expansive moments, dominate the entire world. He is 1 millimeter tall. He lives in a restaurant that has no customers. He has been failing at this project for longer than most of the show's main characters have been alive. Plankton is a copepod. In the real ocean, copepods are tiny crustaceans, some of the most numerous animals on the planet, forming a massive part of the ocean's food chain, despite being almost invisible to the naked eye. Hillenburg's marine science background is present in that choice. Plankton is not a made-up creature. He is a real category of ocean animal, scaled up just enough to be visible and given a name, a wife, a restaurant, and a lifelong obsession. His full name is Sheldon J. Plankton, though the show uses it rarely. He is green, he has one large eye on a stalk, and he has tiny arms and legs. His voice, provided by Doug Lawrence, who also wrote for the show under the name Mr. Lawrence, is high and sharp, with a quality of constant frustration underneath it. Lawrence voices Plankton as someone who is always aware of how close he is to being dismissed entirely, and who compensates for that awareness by projecting as much menace as a 1 millimeter body can physically project. Nickelodeon executives, during the development of the show, wanted Hillenburg to cast a celebrity in the role of Plankton. This was standard practice at the time. Animated shows frequently used recognizable voices as a marketing tool, and a famous name attached to a character could drive attention to a new series. Hillenburg refused. He had made a deliberate decision to build the show around voice artists rather than celebrities, and Plankton was no exception. Lawrence, who was already part of the writing team, kept the role. His performance became one of the most recognizable in the show's history. Plankton was originally conceived as a character who would appear in only one episode. The first episode to feature him, titled simply Plankton, was produced as a standalone story about SpongeBob being manipulated by a small creature trying to steal the Krabby Patty formula. The character was not planned as a recurring presence. He became one because he worked. The dynamic between Plankton and Mr. Krabs, the chum bucket opposite the Krusty Krab, the scale of Plankton's ambition against the scale of his body, all of it generated enough comedic and narrative energy that the character kept coming back. The episode Plankton, which is the 6th episode of Season 1 in production order, establishes the core of everything the character will do for the rest of the series. Plankton's plan in this episode involves attaching a mind control device to SpongeBob's head and using it to walk SpongeBob into the Krusty Krab, steal a Krabby Patty, and carry it back to the chum bucket for analysis. The plan requires Plankton to physically climb into SpongeBob's brain, which he does, fitting neatly inside SpongeBob's head and operating him from the inside like a control room. SpongeBob, once he realizes what is happening, resists from within his own mind, eventually confronting Plankton in a mental landscape where SpongeBob's thoughts and instincts push back against the invasion. Plankton is defeated, ejected, and returned to the chum bucket with nothing. This pattern, Plankton devises a plan, executes it with genuine cleverness and commitment, gets close enough to almost succeed, and then fails completely at the last moment, is established fully in that first episode, and runs without significant variation through every Plankton story in Season 1 and most of what follows. The failure is not random. It follows from who Plankton is. He is intelligent, determined, and technically capable. He is also operating alone against a restaurant full of employees and a city full of people who prefer the Krusty Krab. The scale of what he is attempting against the resources he actually has makes his failure essentially inevitable every time, and the show mines that gap for both comedy and something approaching sympathy. Karen is Plankton's wife. She is a computer, a large, flat computer screen on a wheeled base with an artificial intelligence sophisticated enough to hold conversations, analyze situations, give Plankton advice, and express something that functions like emotion. Her voice is provided by Jill Talley, who is Tom Kenny's real-life wife. The casting of a real married couple to voice a married couple within the show was not a coincidence. Hillenburg was aware of the dynamic it would create. Two people who actually know each other intimately, performing the rhythms of a long marriage, adds a layer of texture to the Karen and Plankton relationship that would be harder to manufacture with two strangers. Karen is introduced in Season 1 and is present in the chum bucket from the beginning. Her relationship with Plankton is complicated and consistent. She provides him with plans. She analyzes the Krabby Patty in several episodes using her computer capabilities, extracting what information she can from the burger itself. She is frequently more practically intelligent than Plankton, and she tells him so. She has opinions about his schemes, and she shares them whether he wants to hear them or not. Plankton and Karen argue the way two people argue when they have been together long enough that disagreement has become its own form of closeness. In one later episode, Karen manages to analyze a Krabby Patty and extract what she believes is the formula. The information is lost when she explodes shortly afterward, a running hazard of being a computer in a cartoon. In another episode, she extracts the formula again in a different way, but the attempt fails before the formula can be used. Karen's ability to get close to the answer and the show's commitment to making sure she never quite gets there is part of the same pattern that governs all of Plankton's attempts. The chum bucket sits directly across the street from the Krusty Krab. This placement is the show's most consistent visual joke. Every time the camera shows the Krusty Krab from the outside, the chum bucket is visible in the background, smaller, darker, emptier. Every time Plankton looks out from his restaurant, the Krusty Krab is right there. The proximity is not accidental geography. It is a daily reminder, built into the physical layout of Conch Street, of everything Plankton has failed to achieve. He can see the restaurant he wants to destroy from his front door. He has been able to see it since the beginning. The food at the chum bucket is made from chum. In the real world, chum is a mixture of fish parts, blood, and scraps used by fishermen to attract larger fish. It is bait. It is not food for people. In Bikini Bottom, Plankton serves it as if it were food, apparently genuinely believing that with the right marketing or the right recipe modification, it could compete with the Krabby Patty. The citizens of Bikini Bottom will not eat it. The chum bucket's customer count across the entire run of the show is effectively 0 for almost every episode. Occasionally, a character ends up at the chum bucket due to unusual circumstances, a dare, a bet, an accident, and the food is uniformly described as terrible. The one exception established across the show is that the chum bucket does serve actual meat. Doug Lawrence explained that the show maintained a rule where fish are not depicted as food in Bikini Bottom Bottom, with one exception: the Chum Bucket's menu. This makes the Chum Bucket not just unappetizing, but quietly darker than the Krusty Krab, in a way that the show never states directly. Plankton's restaurant is the one place in Bikini Bottom that serves what fish in a real ocean would actually be afraid of becoming. Season 1 uses Plankton sparingly compared to later seasons. He appears in Plankton and in FUN, and is referenced in other episodes. FUN is the Season 1 episode where SpongeBob, convinced that Plankton is lonely and friendless, attempts to befriend him. The episode runs on SpongeBob's genuine belief that kindness can reach anyone. He takes Plankton jellyfish hunting, teaches him the FUN song, and treats him as a real friend. Plankton, for most of the episode, appears to be responding. He and SpongeBob sing together. They go to the movies. Something that looks like genuine warmth develops between them. Then Plankton tries to steal a Krabby Patty at the movie theater, and SpongeBob catches him, and the episode ends with Plankton in a bag and back at the Chum Bucket, having failed again. What FUN does is establish something important about Plankton's character that the first Plankton episode does not have time for. Plankton is not simply evil in the way cartoon villains are often simply evil, one-dimensional, motivated by nothing but the desire to cause harm. He is someone who could theoretically connect with another person. SpongeBob's friendship reaches something real in him, or at least something that looks real from the outside. The show does not commit fully to either reading. Whether Plankton was genuinely affected by SpongeBob's friendship in FUN, or was performing friendship the entire time as part of his scheme, is left deliberately unclear. Both things could be true simultaneously, and the show lets them be. This complexity makes Plankton more interesting than his 1mm frame and his constant failures might suggest. He has a marriage with real texture. He has a history with Mr. Krabs that goes back further than Season 1 shows. He has schemes that are genuinely clever, plans that require real intelligence to execute, and a commitment to his goal that does not waver across decades of failure. He is not a figure the show treats with contempt. He is treated with a kind of affection. The affection a writer has for a character who is wrong about almost everything, but is at least very specifically and committedly wrong about it. Mr. Krabs, for his part in Season 1, is established as someone who loves money above most other things, and who runs his restaurant with a combination of genuine business sense and extreme cheapness. He is not simply Plankton's opposite. He is someone who took the Krabby Patty formula and built an empire with it, and who protects that empire with more energy than he puts into almost anything else in his life. The rivalry between Krabs and Plankton in Season 1 is not equal. Krabs is winning by an enormous margin, and he knows it. The Chum Bucket's emptiness is partly a result of the Krusty Krab's success. One restaurant thriving across the street from another guarantees the other stays empty. Season 1 plants Plankton firmly as the show's most persistent antagonist and gives Karen a clear role as his partner, advisor, and occasional critic. The Chum Bucket is established as the visual and emotional opposite of everything the Krusty Krab represents. The formula remains safe. Plankton remains across the street. The pattern that will run for the rest of the show's life is in place from the first season. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That dynamic between ambition and failure, between loneliness and connection, runs through everything Plankton does in Season 1, and it makes for an interesting contrast with two other characters the show introduces that season. Characters who are also old, also past their prime, and also operating far below their former glory. Only those two characters are beloved rather than feared, retired rather than scheming, and living in a place designed for people who have stopped trying. Section 7. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. Season 1's superhero mythology. SpongeBob and Patrick are sitting in SpongeBob's living room watching television when Season 1 introduces one of its most quietly layered ideas. The show they are watching is called The Adventures of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. It is an old superhero show, the kind of live-action adventure series that ran on television in the 1950s and 1960s, where heroes in bright costumes fought villains in ways that were exciting to children and slightly ridiculous to everyone else. SpongeBob and Patrick watch it with total, undivided devotion. They know every episode. They have the merchandise. They treat Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy the way real children treat real heroes, with a reverence that is completely sincere and completely out of proportion to what the show itself probably deserved even in its prime. Then SpongeBob and Patrick find out that Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are real. Not characters, not actors playing characters, actual superheroes, actual people who actually fought actual evil, and who are now retired and living at Shady Shoals Rest Home, a few miles from SpongeBob's Pineapple on Conch Street. The episode Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, which aired on August 21st, 1999, as the 6th episode of Season 1, is built entirely around what happens when two children, one a sea sponge, one a starfish, discover that their favorite heroes have been sitting in a retirement home this whole time, playing checkers and going to the cafeteria for lunch, apparently content to never fight crime again. SpongeBob and Patrick's reaction to this information is immediate and physical. They go to Shady Shoals. They ask to see them. They are told at the front desk that Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy do not take visitors. They go anyway. What they find is not what the television show promised. Mermaid Man is elderly, confused, and prone to shouting the word evil at random intervals when it is triggered by something he hears. His memory is unreliable. He mistakes SpongeBob for a threat on multiple occasions. Barnacle Boy is sharper and more alert, but deeply irritated by Mermaid Man's absent-mindedness, by SpongeBob and Patrick's presence, by the indignity of being treated like a curiosity rather than a person. He is grumpy in the specific way of someone who has been underappreciated for a very long time and has largely stopped expecting things to improve. Mermaid Man was voiced by Ernest Borgnine. Barnacle Boy was voiced by Tim Conway. Both men were already legends in American entertainment when they took these roles. Borgnine had won an Academy Award in 1955 for the film Marty. Conway was one of the most celebrated comedic performers in American television, known primarily for his work on The Carol Burnett Show. They had worked together previously. Both appeared in the 1960s television sitcom McHale's Navy, and their reunion for SpongeBob marked their first joint television project in 33 years. Hillenburg and Derek Drymon had Borgnine and Conway at the top of their casting list from the very beginning of the show's development. They were fans of McHale's Navy and knew the specific chemistry those two performers had together. The way Conway's dry, slightly caustic delivery played against Borgnine's louder, more animated energy. They wanted that dynamic for Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. They approached Borgnine and Conway directly, and both accepted. Borgnine described the recording sessions as deeply enjoyable. He said he and Conway played off each other in the studio the same way they always had. That Conway was such a natural performer that the scenes generated their own energy. People outside the recording room, Borgnine said, were guffawing at what they could hear through the walls. He described the voice acting work as like stealing money. You walk in, you use your voice, and somehow that becomes a character that lives for other people. The moment Borgnine got the voice of Mermaid Man was an accident. When he said the word evil during recording, his voice cracked. Rather than asking for another take, he and the production team decided to keep it. That cracked, slightly unhinged quality to the word evil became one of the character's most recognizable traits. Mermaid Man does not say evil the way a normal person says a normal word. He says it like it is the most alarming thing he has ever encountered, every single time, regardless of context. The episode's plot involves SpongeBob and Patrick trying to convince Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy to come out of retirement. They attempt multiple approaches. They send fan letters. They wait outside the retirement home. They stage a fake crime scene using Squidward as an unwilling villain, with SpongeBob dressed as a woman and Patrick dressed as a criminal pretending to steal a purse. Barnacle Boy is not fooled by the disguises. He recognizes SpongeBob immediately and tells him to be quiet because Mermaid Man is taking a nap. The staging of that moment is worth noting. Barnacle Boy does not say he cannot see through the disguise. He sees through it instantly and moves on without making it a big deal. He is too tired for drama. His entire demeanor in the episode is that of someone who has been dealing with well-meaning idiots for decades and has developed a tolerance for it that borders on its own kind of exhaustion. Eventually, SpongeBob gives a speech inside the retirement home about why superheroes should not be retired. The speech is earnest and completely sincere. Mermaid Man's response is to declare SpongeBob man and wife, confusing the situation so badly that the retirement home's caretaker has to intervene. SpongeBob gets thrown out. He is kicked out of a retirement home for giving a motivational speech about heroism. He does not give up. He and Patrick come back with a new plan, and eventually, through a combination of persistence and genuine enthusiasm, they get Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy to leave the retirement home and return to their old headquarters. The episode ends with the heroes back in action, however briefly and however reluctantly. The in-universe history of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, as established across Season 1 and built upon in later seasons, presents them as two of the most significant figures in Bikini Bottom's past. Their television show was a real document of real events. The adventures depicted on screen actually happened. The villains they fought actually existed, and the impact they had on Bikini Bottom was genuine. The show within the show is not a fiction inside the fiction. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are actual heroes who actually did those things, and their retirement is an actual retirement from an actual career. Their base of operations is called the Mermalair in most later episodes, though in this first Season 1 appearance, it is referred to as the Sea Cave. The Mermalair contains their equipment, their vehicles, and the accumulated history of their careers, trophies, memorabilia, and the infrastructure of a superhero operation that has been sitting dormant since they stopped working. The villains that Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy fought are also established as real figures within Bikini Bottom's history. Man Ray is mentioned by name in the Season 1 episode as one of their greatest enemies, though he does not appear physically until Season 2. The Dirty Bubble, another major villain, is mentioned in Season 1 and appears physically in the Season 1 finale, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2, voiced by Charles Nelson Riley. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are among the few human characters who appear in Bikini Bottom. They can breathe underwater and communicate with the sea creatures around them. The show treats this as simply true without explaining it. Within Bikini Bottom's world, humans who can survive underwater are not common, but Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are presented as a specific and established exception. People whose powers include the ability to exist in SpongeBob's world without the complications that a normal surface human would face there. The relationship between the two heroes carries a specific dynamic that becomes clearer across their multiple appearances in Season 1 and beyond. Mermaid Man is the senior partner, the more recognized name, the one whose title comes first, the one whose face appears on most of the merchandise. Barnacle Boy is the sidekick, the junior partner, the one who has spent his entire career standing slightly to the left in every photograph. He has maintained his abilities better than Mermaid Man in old age. He is sharper, more functional, more capable. He is also still being treated like a child's sidekick decades after the fact, still being called boy despite being an old man, still ordering from the children's menu at the retirement home cafeteria because that is the dynamic that was established when he was young, and nobody has adjusted it since. This dynamic becomes the explicit subject of a later episode, but its seeds are planted clearly in Season 1. The relationship between Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy is not simply a comedy duo of two old men being confused by enthusiastic children. There is a real and long-standing inequality inside it. One hero celebrated, one perpetually underappreciated, and the show is aware of that imbalance even when it is playing their scenes for laughs. Borgnine guest starred in 16 episodes of SpongeBob across the show's run, more than any other guest star in the show's history. Conway appeared in more than 15 episodes as Barnacle Boy. Their collaboration on the show stretched across more than a decade. When Borgnine died of kidney failure on July 8, 2012, at the age of 95, Nickelodeon honored him with a 2-hour SpongeBob marathon built around episodes featuring his character. Conway continued with the role for several more years before health problems made recording difficult. He died on May 14, 2019, at the age of 85. After both men passed away, Steven Hillenburg made a specific decision. He did not want the characters recast. He did not want sound-alikes hired to replicate what Borgnine and Conway had built. Vincent Waller, the show's showrunner, confirmed this publicly. Hillenburg was clear that he did not want anyone replacing Borgnine with an imitation. The decision was final. After their deaths, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy were reduced to non-speaking appearances. Brief cameos, background presence, characters seen but not heard. The voices those two men gave the characters were treated as irreplaceable, and the show honored that by simply not replacing them. That decision says something about how Hillenburg thought about the show and the people who contributed to it. The characters were not simply content to be produced in whatever form was most convenient. They were built by specific people with specific gifts, and those gifts were not transferable. What Season 1 planted with Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy was a piece of Bikini Bottom's history, proof that the world had a past before SpongeBob arrived, that heroes had existed and done real things and grown old in the aftermath. The retirement home is not just a location, it is evidence that Bikini Bottom's world has been running long enough for its greatest figures to have grown old inside it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The history of Bikini Bottom runs deeper still. There are figures in that world who are not old and retired, who have not slowed down or settled into a rest home. There are figures who have been haunting the ocean for thousands of years, carrying a grudge born from the most absurd and undignified circumstances imaginable, and who first make their presence known in Season 1 in a way so quiet and understated that most viewers absorb it without noticing. Section 8. The Flying Dutchman, Season 1's Ghost Mythology. The Flying Dutchman does not appear in person for most of Season 1. He is introduced as a picture in a comic book. SpongeBob finds the comic while cleaning out a room in Squidward's house, reads a few panels of it to Patrick, and moves on. The scene lasts less than a minute. The Flying Dutchman gets no dialogue, no physical presence, no dramatic entrance. He is a drawing on a page inside a story about something else entirely. And yet, in that brief moment, the show plants the entire foundation of one of its most enduring characters, his origin, his motivation, and the specific and deeply strange reason he has been haunting the ocean for longer than anyone in Bikini Bottom has been alive. The episode is Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost, which aired during Season 1. The main plot has nothing to do with the Flying Dutchman. Squidward accidentally lets SpongeBob and Patrick believe they have destroyed his wax sculpture while he was in the bath, path, and rather than correcting the misunderstanding, he decides to pretend he is a ghost and use their guilt and fear to make them wait on him. The episode is about Squidward's vanity and his willingness to manipulate two genuinely caring people for personal comfort. The Flying Dutchman is a footnote, a detail SpongeBob stumbles across while doing chores. The comic book SpongeBob finds tells the story of who the Flying Dutchman is and why he does what he does. The explanation is simple and specific. After the Flying Dutchman died, the cause of his death is never stated. A clothing store used his body as a window display, a mannequin. His corpse was dressed up, posed, and placed in a shop window for customers to look at. His name in the comic connects this to a store called Kid World. He was never buried. He was never given a proper funeral or a proper resting place. Because of this, he was never able to rest. He became a ghost, doomed to haunt the seven seas forever, because the people who found his body after he died treated it as a prop rather than as a person. That is the origin of the Flying Dutchman. Not a dramatic death at sea, not a curse placed by a powerful enemy, not a deal with some supernatural force. A clothing store used him as a mannequin, and now he haunts the ocean. SpongeBob reads this and immediately draws a parallel to Squidward's situation. Squidward is pretending to be a ghost, and according to the comic, the Flying Dutchman became a ghost because he was never laid to rest. SpongeBob concludes that Squidward's ghost must be stuck on Earth for the same reason, and that the solution is to give Squidward a proper burial. Squidward, who is not dead and knows he is not dead, but cannot admit this without ending his comfortable arrangement, is then subjected to SpongeBob and Patrick's attempt to hold a funeral for him. The residents of Bikini Bottom attend. There is a black piano. It is exactly as undignified as it sounds. The Flying Dutchman's physical debut comes in the Season 1 Halloween episode, Scaredy Pants. The episode aired as a Halloween special, and it ends with the Flying Dutchman arriving at the Krusty Krab during a Halloween party. His entrance is preceded by a thunderstorm. Whenever the Flying Dutchman appears in the show, a sudden storm materializes around him, green-tinged and immediate, regardless of what the weather was doing before he arrived. He is large, green-glowing, and immediately furious. Not about anything SpongeBob has done, not about any specific crime committed that evening. He is furious about Halloween itself, about the tradition of dressing up as ghosts and monsters, and specifically about the tradition of dressing up as him. Every year, he says, people put on costumes that are supposed to look like him, and every year those costumes make him look ridiculous. They turn the Flying Dutchman name into a laughingstock. He has had enough. His plan, as he announces it to the crowd at the party, is to steal the souls of everyone present. This is what the Flying Dutchman does. He carries a bag labeled souls, and collecting souls from the living is presented as his primary function in the world of Bikini Bottom. The show positions him as a supernatural figure who escorts the dead to their final destination, a role similar to what many cultures assign to death figures in their mythology. Davy Jones's locker, which is referenced in connection with the Flying Dutchman across the show, turns out in later episodes to be a literal locker, an actual school locker, full of sweaty socks, belonging to someone named Davy Jones, who apparently works out a great deal. Before the Flying Dutchman can take anyone's soul at the Halloween party, he notices SpongeBob's costume. SpongeBob has come dressed as a ghost, which already irritates the Dutchman on general principle, but the costume is unusual because Patrick has been shaving SpongeBob throughout the episode in an attempt to make the sheet over his head look more like a real ghost. Patrick has shaved too much. When the Flying Dutchman pulls off SpongeBob's costume to demonstrate what a real ghost looks like, he reveals SpongeBob's exposed brain underneath. The sheet and the shaving have removed everything above SpongeBob's neck, and what is left is a raw, exposed, deeply alarming sight. The Flying Dutchman, who haunts the seven seas, who has been doing this for thousands of years, who came to a Halloween party specifically to steal people's souls and frighten everyone present, is terrified by what he sees. He screams. He flees. The party continues. The Flying Dutchman was voiced by Brian Doyle Murray, who appeared in Season 1. The voice Doyle Murray built for the character has a West Country pirate accent, the rolling, slightly rough sound associated with pirates in movies and stories, the kind of accent that implies a life at sea. There is also a slight lateral lisp in the Dutchman's speech, a small quirk that makes him sound slightly off in a way that is hard to place but that distinguishes him from a straightforward impression of a movie pirate. The combination gives the character a presence that is simultaneously threatening and faintly absurd, which is exactly the register the show needed. The character is named after a real legend. The Flying Dutchman is one of the most famous ghost stories in maritime history. A ghost ship said to be doomed to sail the oceans forever without ever being able to make port. The legend has existed in various forms for centuries, appearing in literature, opera, and countless adaptations. The ship in the legend is typically portrayed as an omen of doom. Sailors who see it are said to face disaster. Hillenburg took the name and the general concept of a maritime ghost condemned to wander forever and built a specific character out of of it, giving the legend a concrete and comedic origin rather than a mysterious one. Several details about the Flying Dutchman are established across his Season 1 appearances and expanded in later episodes. He has not worn shoes in over 5,000 years, which means he has been a ghost for at least that long. He has won the Fancy Knotting Contest, a competition involving tying specific types of rope knots, for the past 3,000 years straight. The knots he knows include the pretzel knot, the double diamond knot, the square knot, the constrictor, the gut knot, the pillow knot, the butterfly knot, the monkey chain, the monkey's fist, and others. Despite his mastery of thousands of years worth of knots, he cannot tie a basic shoelace knot because he has not worn shoes in 5,000 years and has therefore never needed to learn that one. He cannot eat without his dining sock. This is established in a later episode called Shanghaied, where SpongeBob and Patrick end up aboard the Flying Dutchman's ship. The dining sock is a specific object the Dutchman requires to be present during meals. Without it, he will not eat. The combination of terrifying supernatural power and extremely specific personal requirements, the dining sock, the shoe problem, the deep offense taken at Halloween costumes, gives the Flying Dutchman a texture that makes him feel like a real character rather than simply a scary presence the show pulls out when it needs one. His ship, the Flying Dutchman's ghost ship, floats in the underwater sky above Bikini Bottom. The ship does not sit on the ocean floor the way the buildings of Bikini Bottom do. It drifts in the water above the city, a massive ghostly vessel that appears when the Dutchman appears and disappears with him. The ship itself does not make its full appearance until the Season 1 episode Arg, where it is seen properly for the first time after being mentioned earlier in the season. The origin story planted in Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost, the clothing store mannequin, the lack of burial, the haunting that began because of an indignity after death rather than a dramatic supernatural event, does something specific for the character. It makes the Flying Dutchman sympathetic in a way that a more traditionally threatening ghost would not be. He is powerful, ancient, and genuinely capable of causing harm. He is also, at the root of everything, someone who was disrespected after he died and has never gotten over it. The rage that drives him is not evil in a pure sense. It is the rage of someone who deserved better than he got and has been waiting a very long time for someone to acknowledge that. The show uses this sympathy carefully. The Flying Dutchman is not presented as a victim. He is presented as a genuine threat when the story needs him to be one. He steals souls. He curses people. He is capable of genuine cruelty when his pride is wounded or his patience runs out. But the origin story in Squidward the Unfriendly Ghost makes sure the audience knows there is something underneath the threat, a grievance that is, by the show's own logic, entirely reasonable. The detail about the real-world inspiration for the mannequin origin is worth noting. The story of a corpse being used as a display or prop, rather than being properly buried, has a real historical parallel in the story of Elmer McCurdy, an outlaw who was killed in 1911 and whose body was subsequently used as a carnival attraction and display prop for 65 years before being identified and given a proper burial. Whether Hillenburg and the writing team were aware of McCurdy specifically when they created the Flying Dutchman's origin is not confirmed in any available record, but the parallel between a real corpse used as entertainment and a fictional ghost haunting the world because his body was used as a shop window mannequin is close enough to be worth noting. The Flying Dutchman's presence in Season 1 is deliberately limited. 2 appearances, one as a picture in a comic book, one as a physical arrival at a Halloween party, establish him without overusing him. The show had learned, in building Plankton as a character, that a figure whose power depends partly on mystery benefits from being deployed carefully. Plankton is effective because he is not in every episode. The Flying Dutchman is effective in Season 1 partly because his physical appearance is withheld until Halloween, the single most appropriate moment in the season for him to arrive. By the time the thunderstorm appears outside the Krusty Krab on Halloween night and the green glow precedes him through the door, the audience has already been given the outline of who he is. The comic book scene weeks earlier planted the seed. His physical arrival pays it off. The show gave the character a mythology before it gave him a body, which meant that when the body arrived, it was walking into a space that had already been prepared for it. Season 1 built much of its world this way, planting details quietly in one episode, letting them exist without immediate payoff, and returning to them later when the story needed what had been planted. That patience in building the show's mythology is one of the things that makes Season 1 feel different from later seasons, where the pace of production and the volume of episodes made that kind of long game construction harder to sustain. The world that Season 1 assembled had depth because the people building it were thinking about more than the immediate episode. They were thinking about the city, its history, and the kind of place it had been long before SpongeBob woke up one morning and said today was the big day. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The voices that brought all of that world to life, SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, Krabs, Plankton, Mermaid Man, Barnacle Boy, the Flying Dutchman, were assembled with as much care as the world itself. How those voices were chosen, what made each of them the right and only choice, and what the people behind them brought to Season 1 that could not have come from anyone else, is a story that runs parallel to everything else the season built. Section 9. The Voice Cast. How the core ensemble was assembled. Every character in Season 1 of SpongeBob SquarePants sounds exactly like they should sound. That statement seems obvious when you have grown up with the show. SpongeBob sounds like SpongeBob. Patrick sounds like Patrick. Squidward sounds like Squidward. The voices feel so permanently attached to the characters that imagining any of them differently feels almost impossible. The way it feels impossible to imagine a different face on someone you have known your whole life. But none of it was inevitable. Every single voice in Season 1 was a choice, made by specific people under specific circumstances, and several of those choices came within a hair of going a different way. The show was built around voice artists rather than celebrities. Hillenburg was deliberate about this from the beginning of production. Most animated shows at the time leaned on recognizable names, famous actors, musicians, or comedians whose voices audiences already knew, as a way of drawing attention to a new series. The logic was straightforward. A famous name attached to a character gave the marketing team something to work with and gave the network confidence that people would tune in. Hillenburg did not want that. He believed the characters should be built by people who could find the truth of the character, whose primary skill was voice performance, and whose work would serve the show rather than the show serving their public profile. The result was a cast of working voice artists and writers, most of whom were not famous outside of animation industry circles, whose performances became some of the most recognizable voices in television history. Tom Kenny was the first piece of the puzzle to fall into place, and the way it happened was accidental, in a way that makes the whole thing feel slightly unreal in hindsight. Kenny had worked with Hillenburg on Rocko's Modern Life, where he had voiced several characters across the show's run. At some point during those years, Kenny had used a particular voice for a minor character in one episode, a high, somewhat nasal, genuinely enthusiastic voice that did not belong to any of his main characters and that he used once and then moved on from. He did not think much about it afterward. When Hillenburg began developing SpongeBob SquarePants and started thinking about who should voice the central character, he remembered that voice. He pulled out a video recording of the Rocko episode where Kenny had used it and played it back. Kenny, when Hillenburg showed it to him, could not replicate it from memory. He had forgotten how to do the voice. He had to watch himself doing it on the tape and essentially relearn it from the outside, studying his own past performance to find his way back into it. When he had it again and performed it for Hillenburg, the reaction was immediate. Hillenburg told Nickelodeon he had found his SpongeBob. He said he did not want to hear anybody else do the voice. The network pushed back, as networks do. They wanted more auditions, wanted to consider other options, wanted to run a proper casting process. Hillenburg refused. Kenny later described this as one of the advantages of having a strong creator at the helm of a show. The creator can say, "No, this is the one," and mean it, and the show benefits from that certainty. The laugh was developed separately from the voice itself. The show's casting team had a specific goal for SpongeBob's laugh. They wanted something unique and immediately recognizable in the tradition of classic cartoon characters whose laughs became as famous as their faces. Popeye had a distinctive laugh. Woody Woodpecker had a distinctive laugh. SpongeBob needed something in that category, a sound that would be identifiable in isolation, that would carry across a room and be recognizable to anyone who had ever seen the show. Kenny developed the series of sharp, high, honking sounds that became SpongeBob's laugh, and it was kept. The laugh sits slightly apart from the voice itself in its quality. The speaking voice is enthusiastic and warm, while the laugh is almost mechanical in its repetition, like a sound effect attached to a person. That combination gave SpongeBob a sonic identity that was complete in a way neither element alone could have achieved. The voice recording sessions for Season 1 were held at Nickelodeon Animation Studio in Burbank, California. The cast came in and recorded their lines working from storyboards rather than finished animation. They were reading dialogue and reacting to drawn images, building their performances without the visual feedback that finished animation would have provided. This meant the actors had to create the emotional reality of each scene from the inside rather than from the outside. They were not responding to what a finished character looked like on screen. They were deciding what the character felt, how urgently they felt it, and how that feeling came out in their voice. The animation in Korea was then built around those recordings. The timing of a character's movement in any given scene, how long they held a look, when they turned, how their face changed, was shaped by the rhythm of the voice performance that had already been captured. Bill Fagerbake's path to Patrick was shaped by how Hillenburg ran the audition. When Fagerbake came in to read for the role, Hillenburg played him a portion of Kenny's SpongeBob recording before Fagerbake performed. This was deliberate. Hillenburg wanted Fagerbake to hear the energy and register of SpongeBob's voice so that Patrick could be built as a counterpoint rather than in isolation. The two characters needed to work together sonically. Their voices needed to create a contrast that reflected the contrast in their personalities. What Fagerbacke brought to Patrick was slowness, depth, and a complete absence of urgency. Where SpongeBob is quick and high and slightly anxious, Patrick is low and unhurried and unbothered by everything. The contrast between them is audible before a single word of dialogue is processed. Just hearing the two characters speak in the same scene establishes that they come from different registers of experience and yet belong together completely. Fagerbacke found a specific note for Patrick's anger, a quality he described as being modeled on the actress Shelley Winters, known for performances that carried a particular kind of dramatic, loaded intensity. Whenever Patrick gets genuinely angry in the show, that specific Shelley Winters quality is in the performance, though it arrives in a body that is a large pink starfish living under a rock in an underwater city, which changes the effect considerably. Patrick's voice in Season 1 is notably more capable sounding than the version of the character that develops in later seasons. The show gradually made Patrick slower and less aware of things around him as the seasons progressed, and the voice performance shifted with that evolution. In Season 1, Patrick is still the version of the character who talks SpongeBob into going to the Krusty Krab in Help Wanted. He is an encouraging presence, a confident friend, someone whose low and steady voice communicates reliability rather than pure confusion. That quality is present in Fagerbacke's performance from the beginning, and it is part of what makes the SpongeBob and Patrick friendship in Season 1 feel genuinely warm rather than simply comedic. Roger Bumpass came to Squidward with a clear and specific idea of what the character needed to sound like. He described Squidward as a very nasally, monotone kind of person, someone whose voice sits in a register that communicates exhaustion and contempt without having to work very hard at either. Bumpass found the character interesting, specifically because of the emotional range that existed within that monotone framework. Squidward is not simply flat. He is frustrated, sarcastic, wounded, occasionally triumphant, and sometimes genuinely devastated. All of those emotional states run through the same nasally, deflated voice, which means the range has to be expressed through subtle variations rather than dramatic shifts. Bumpass built a character whose feelings are always present underneath the surface and almost never fully expressed on top of it, which is one of the things that makes Squidward funny and something more than funny simultaneously. The voice Bumpass built for Squidward has a particular quality in Season 1 that the character carries specifically in his interactions with SpongeBob and Patrick. There is a heaviness to it, not sadness exactly, but the weight of someone who has been in this situation before and knows exactly how it ends. When Squidward sees SpongeBob approaching the Krusty Krab in Help Wanted and says his name in that particular tone, the audience does not need to be told these two have a history. The voice communicates it completely in a single word. That kind of economy of expression is a product of careful performance, and Bumpass finds it immediately and maintains it across every episode of Season 1. Clancy Brown's approach to Mr. Krabs started from a description Hillenburg gave him. Hillenburg had worked at a seafood restaurant at some point before his career in animation, and had a manager there whose voice he remembered clearly, a strong Maine accent that reminded him, for reasons he could not fully explain, of pirate movies. That quality, whatever it was what Hillenburg wanted for Mr. Krabs. Brown took that starting point and added something of his own, a slight Scottish quality layered on top of the Maine accent, giving Krabs a voice that feels genuinely nautical and slightly old-fashioned in a way that is hard to place geographically, but that immediately signals a life spent near the sea. The combination of Maine and Scottish and pirate produces something that does not sound like any real accent from any real place, which is exactly right for a crab who lives at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean and runs a fast food restaurant inside a lobster trap. Doug Lawrence, who voiced Plankton, was already part of the show's writing staff. He worked under the name Mr. Lawrence as a writer and contributed to episodes across Season 1 and beyond. His voice for Plankton is high and sharp, with a compressed intensity underneath it. The voice of someone who is permanently aware of how small they are and permanently committed to making that smallness irrelevant through sheer force of determination and volume. Lawrence built Plankton as someone who projects menace not because he is physically threatening, but because he refuses to accept that he is not. The gap between the menace Plankton projects and the reality of his 1mm body is where most of his comedy lives, and Lawrence's performance holds that gap open perfectly. The fact that Lawrence was both writing the character and voicing the character gave the Plankton episodes of Season 1 a specific coherence. The person deciding what Plankton said and the person saying it were the same person, which meant the dialogue was always written with a complete understanding of how it would sound when performed. Plankton's lines in Season 1 have a rhythm that fits Lawrence's delivery precisely, and that fit is partly because Lawrence was working from the inside of both roles simultaneously. Jill Talley voiced Karen, Plankton's computer wife. Talley is Tom Kenny's wife in real life. The casting of an actual married couple to voice a married couple was something something Hillenburg was aware of when the choice was made. The real familiarity between two people who have been together long enough to have developed their own rhythms of communication, their own shorthand for disagreement and affection, comes through in how Tally and Kenny perform their characters' scenes together. Karen and SpongeBob do not have many shared scenes in Season 1, but the quality of Tally's performance, the dry patience of someone who has been dealing with Plankton's schemes for a very long time and has opinions about all of them, is fully formed from her first appearance. Carolyn Lawrence brought Sandy Cheeks a quality that made her immediately distinct from the other characters in Season 1. Sandy is from Texas. She is a scientist. She is confident, physically capable, and genuinely curious about the world around her. Lawrence gave her a warmth that coexists with her competence. Sandy is not cold or distant, despite being the most technically skilled character in the main cast. She is enthusiastic in a way that parallels SpongeBob's enthusiasm without duplicating it. Where SpongeBob's enthusiasm comes from love and openness, Sandy's comes from curiosity and the pleasure of being good at things. The Texas accent Lawrence used for Sandy gives her an immediate regional identity that sets her apart from every other character in Bikini Bottom. She sounds like she is from somewhere specific, because she is, and that specificity makes her feel more grounded than characters whose voices have no geographic anchor. Mary Jo Catlett's Mrs. Puff is built around a very specific kind of stress. Mrs. Puff is a pufferfish, an animal that inflates when frightened or threatened. The show uses this literally. Whenever SpongeBob crashes during a driving lesson, Mrs. Puff puffs up involuntarily. Catlett built a performance around the sustained tension of someone who is always one bad driving lesson away from a complete breakdown, whose patience has been worn down to almost nothing by years of SpongeBob's catastrophic incompetence, and who nonetheless keeps showing up and trying to teach him because that is her job and she takes her job seriously. There is a genuine sadness underneath Mrs. Puff's stress that Catlett's performance carries without ever making it the point. Mrs. Puff is funny before she is sad, but the sadness is there. Lori Allen voiced Pearl, Mr. Crab's daughter, who is a teenage whale. The casting of a whale as the daughter of a crab is never explained or justified within the show. Pearl is a normal teenage girl. She has friends, she goes to school, she is embarrassed by her father, she has a social life and strong opinions about it. Allen played her with the full emotional range of a teenager who feels things very intensely and is not particularly interested in hiding that. Pearl appears in several Season 1 episodes, most notably The Chaperone, where SpongeBob takes her to her school prom after her date breaks up with her. What the voice cast of Season 1 created was not simply a set of character voices. It was a sonic world, a specific and consistent sound environment that made Bikini Bottom feel inhabited in a way that visual design alone could not achieve. The moment Kenny's SpongeBob says today is the big day to his snail in the opening of Help Wanted, the audience is inside a world that has its own acoustic identity. That identity was built by specific choices made by specific people, and it was complete from the very first episode. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The voices of Season 1 carried the show into the memories of an entire generation, but there was something else running through every episode that worked on a different level entirely. Something the audience absorbed without consciously tracking, something that went straight past the brain and landed somewhere older and more instinctive. The music of Season 1 did things to the people who grew up watching it that they are still discovering decades later when a particular piece of stock audio comes through their speakers and something in their chest immediately recognizes it. Section 10. The music of Season 1, stock libraries and an accidental soundtrack. There is a piece of music that plays when the Krusty Krab appears on screen. Most people who grew up watching SpongeBob know exactly what it sounds like without being able to name it. A steady, slightly bouncy melody played on what sounds like a combination of light strings and folk instruments, rolling forward at a pace that feels unhurried and reliable, the sonic equivalent of a place that has been open for business for a long time and expects to stay that way. The track is called The Rake Hornpipe. It was written by a composer named Robert White and originally recorded as part of a folk music collection released by a music library called KPM Music. It has nothing to do with underwater cities or cartoon crabs or fast food restaurants. It is a piece of library music, written to be available for any production that needed a certain kind of sound, sitting in a catalog alongside hundreds of other pieces until a music supervisor at Nickelodeon Animation Studio in Burbank, California, decided it was exactly right for a fictional lobster trap restaurant at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. The Rake Hornpipe first appears in Help Wanted, the pilot episode of Season 1. It plays when Mr. Krabs begins speaking for the first time. That is where the association between the track and the Krusty Krab is established, and it is an association that holds across Season 1 and far beyond. The track became so completely identified with the restaurant that most people who hear it today hear the Krusty Krab before they hear anything else. The music arrives before Mr. Krabs has said a word, before the audience has had any time to form an opinion about who this character is, and it tells them everything they need to know about the place he runs. Reliable, slightly old-fashioned, completely confident in its own right to exist. The Krusty Krab in sound before the Krusty Krab in image. The music of SpongeBob Season 1 works this way almost entirely. The show does not have a traditional composed score, a set of original pieces written specifically for the show by a single composer and used exclusively in it. Instead, Season 1's music comes from production music libraries. These are large collections of pre-recorded music, available for licensed use in film, television, and other productions. A library might contain thousands of tracks covering every conceivable mood, tempo, and genre. A music supervisor selects pieces from these libraries to use in specific scenes, pairing tracks with images based on how well the music serves the moment. This approach to scoring television was not unusual in the 1990s, particularly for animation. It had a long history in cartoons. Classic theatrical shorts from decades earlier used library music extensively, and the tradition carried forward into television animation. What made SpongeBob's use of library music distinctive was the specific catalog it drew from and the specific selections that became permanently attached to specific characters, locations, and emotional moments. The library music choices in Season 1 were not random or interchangeable, they were precise. Each track landed in a specific place in a specific scene and stayed there, becoming part of the show's identity through repetition and consistency across 20 episodes. The man responsible for the music selections in Season 1 and beyond was a music supervisor named Nicholas Carr. Carr worked on the show from the beginning, pulling tracks from the Associated Production Music Library, known as APM Music. APM is one of the largest production music libraries in the world, containing recordings from dozens of smaller labels and catalogs. Carr also drew from other libraries throughout Season 1, including the Sonaten Library from Germany and several other specialized catalogs. His job was to watch each scene as it came through in its storyboard or animatic form, and find the piece of music that made the scene work better than it would work in silence. He did this for every scene in every episode across the entire first season, making hundreds of individual judgment calls about what sound fit what image. Hillenburg made the decision to use library music rather than a traditional composed score deliberately, following the same approach that Rocko's Modern Life had used. He felt that library music, particularly the heavily Hawaiian-influenced tracks that became central to the show's sonic identity, matched the oceanic, slightly tropical atmosphere he was building for Bikini Bottom. He also believed that the specific quality of older library recordings, recorded years or decades before the show existed, carrying a particular warmth and weight that came from analog recording methods, suited the world he was creating better than freshly composed music would have. There was something about the age of certain library tracks that felt right for a world that operated like it had been running quietly at the bottom of the ocean for a very long time before anyone thought to make a television show about it. Hillenburg also wanted the show to develop its own original music library for pieces that would be composed specifically for SpongeBob and reused across episodes. He wanted those pieces to be created by composers who were not already famous, not established names in film or television scoring, but people whose work would be built around the show rather than around an existing reputation. A group of 12 composers was assembled for this purpose. They formed what became known informally as the Sponge Divers Orchestra. This group included Carr himself and a composer named Steve Belfer, among others. The original pieces they created for the show became part of the show's recurring music alongside the library tracks, giving Season 1 a combination of pre-existing recordings and purpose-built compositions that nobody had done quite that way before. The Hawaiian-influenced tracks in Season 1 established the show's most immediately recognizable sonic atmosphere. Aloha Oe, a traditional Hawaiian song adapted and recorded by various artists across different versions, appears in the pilot episode and throughout Season 1. The version used in the show is performed by George Kulakuhai and his Island Serenaders. The track plays most often in outdoor scenes, the opening establishing shots of Bikini Bottom, scenes set in the community, moments of transition between locations. It gives the world a warmth that matches its visual design. Aloha Oe is a song with a specific and well-documented history in Hawaiian music. It was written by Queen Liliuokalani, the last reigning monarch of Hawaii, and its name translates roughly to "farewell to thee." The show uses it not for its history or its meaning, but for its sound, a gentle and unhurried melody that communicates ease and belonging. In the context of Bikini Bottom, it says home. It says, "This is a place where things are generally fine and the sun is always somewhere nearby." Honolulu March, also from the same catalog as Aloha Oe, serves a similar atmospheric function across Season 1. Hawaiian Train appears in the pilot as well. These tracks, drawn from a library of recorded Hawaiian music, music gives Season 1 a consistent sonic texture that reads as oceanic and slightly sunny, which is exactly the right mood for a show set at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean that somehow manages to feel warm and inviting rather than dark and cold. The Hawaiian music choices reflect Hillenburg's own sensibility, a person who had spent years studying and teaching about the Pacific Ocean, who had built a world set in that ocean, and who wanted the sound of that world to carry a kind of warmth that matched his own genuine affection for the place and what lived there. The pilot episode, Help Wanted, used one track that was not from a library. Tiny Tim's recording of Livin' in the Sunlight, Lovin' in the Moonlight plays during the sequence where SpongeBob cooks Krabby Patties for the anchovy mob. Tiny Tim was an American singer known for his very high voice and for reviving old songs from the early 20th century. His version of Livin' in the Sunlight, Lovin' in the Moonlight was originally recorded in the 1960s. Hillenburg had used it in his pitch to Nickelodeon executives. He played the song during the third act of his presentation to set the tone for the climactic scene. It worked so well that it stayed in the actual episode. The cost of using that track had consequences that lasted years. When Nickelodeon prepared the Season 1 DVD for release in North America in 2003, the network chose not to include Help Wanted in the set. The reason, confirmed by Derek Dryman, was that Nickelodeon did not want to pay Tiny Tim's estate for the right to include the song on a DVD release. The licensing cost of one piece of music in one episode caused the actual first episode of the series to be absent from its own season DVD for years. It appeared on the German DVD release of Season 1, which handled licensing differently, but the standard North American set went without it until later releases included it as a bonus feature. The first episode of one of the most successful cartoons in television history was missing from its own DVD because of a song from the 1960s that plays for under 2 minutes. The detail is absurd in a way that feels completely consistent with the show it affected. The music of Season 1 extended well beyond Hawaiian tracks and the rake hornpipe. Carr pulled from an enormous range of library catalogs to find the right piece for each scene across 20 episodes. The range covered dramatic tension, comedic action, quiet emotional moments, chase sequences, and everything in between. Dramatic QH, a piece by Ronald Hanmer, appears in multiple Season 1 episodes and became one of the show's recurring tracks for moments of building tension or mild suspense. The track has a quality of something slowly tightening, not a full dramatic swell, but a steady accumulation of unease that works perfectly for scenes where something is about to go wrong without having gone wrong yet. Menace from the Deep by Robert Cornford from KPM Music plays in the pilot during the arrival of the anchovies, the moment where Mr. Krabs says that smell, describing the oncoming wave of hungry fish. The track is dark and low and slightly threatening, which is exactly right for a scene that treats a mob of tiny fish as a genuine natural disaster. The comedy of that scene depends partly on the music taking the anchovies completely seriously. The rake hornpipe would be wrong. Menace from the Deep is right. Battle at Sea by Johnny Pearson from KPM Music appears in the pilot during the anchovy crisis itself, when Squidward and Mr. Krabs are clinging to the pole in the middle of the Krusty Krab as the fish surge around them. The track is large and dramatic, the kind of music that belongs in a film about ships and storms rather than a cartoon about a restaurant, and that mismatch between the scale of the music and the scale of the crisis, anchovies wanting food, is one of the show's first fully deployed comedic tools. Death Trap by Gregor Narholtz from the Sonaten Library appears in multiple tense moments across Season 1. On Fire by Gregor Narholtz plays in action and chase sequences. Each of these tracks was pulled from a catalog that had nothing to do with SpongeBob, matched to a specific scene by a music supervisor, making a judgment call about what sound fit what image, and in doing so, became permanently associated in the minds of an entire generation with the specific scenes they underscored. The music for the Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes draws from a different part of the APM library. The track called The Lineman, listed in some catalogs as Forearm Shiver and written by Sam Spence for NFL Films, plays in the Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode during heroic moments. Sam Spence wrote music for National Football League highlight reels for decades, producing tracks specifically designed to make athletic achievement feel monumental. Those tracks carry a specific quality of triumph and grandeur that was built for stadiums and championship games. Using that music for two elderly retired superheroes being slowly coaxed out of a retirement home by an enthusiastic sea sponge creates a comedic contrast that the show earns completely. The music says greatness without qualification, and the images say two old men who have been eating at the same cafeteria for years and are slightly confused about whether to come out of retirement. The gap between those two things is where the joke lives. Superhero, a track by Anthony Hymas from KPM Music, appears in the same episode to similar effect. The show frequently used music that was slightly grander than the scene required, and Season 1 established this as a consistent comedic approach. The gap between what the music promises and what the scene actually delivers is itself a form of humor, deployed carefully and repeatedly across 20 episodes. Carr understood this tool and used it with precision. He was not simply finding music that matched scenes. He was sometimes finding music that was deliberately slightly too large for its scene and letting that mismatch do comedic work. The original compositions created for SpongeBob by the Sponge Divers Orchestra ran alongside the library tracks throughout Season 1. Steve Belfer wrote original pieces, including the Cierre Bob Esponja track that appears in the closing credits of early episodes. These original compositions gave the show its own unique pieces that could not be found in any other production, sitting alongside library tracks that had been used in countless other contexts before SpongeBob existed. The combination of the two, pre-existing recordings that carried a history the show had nothing to do with, and purpose-built compositions that belonged entirely to Bikini Bottom, gave Season 1 a sonic identity that was both specific and layered in a way that was hard to analyze but easy to feel. The theme song itself was written by Hillenburg with Derek Dryman, and its lyrics were developed by that same team. The music for the theme was composed by Mark Harrison and Blaze Smith. The song was built into the show's opening from the very beginning, establishing the show's tone in under a minute. A narrator asking whether the viewer is ready, the answer always being that SpongeBob is ready. The underwater city and its pineapple house, and the cast of characters moving through their world with an energy that the music makes feel both joyful and slightly absurd. The theme is a piece of music that almost everyone who grew up watching Season 1 can sing in full from memory, including the parts that most other people's shows would leave out. The specific detail of the theme, the question and answer structure, the call of the narrator, the way the instruments build, became part of how an entire generation identified the show before a single scene had played. What the music of Season 1 created was not an intentional soundtrack in the way a film score is intentional. Nicholas Carr was not composing a unified work designed to be heard as a whole. He was making individual decisions, episode by episode, scene by scene, pulling from catalogs and matching tracks to images. The result, accumulated across 20 episodes, was something that nobody planned in advance. A sonic world so specific and so consistently applied that it became inseparable from the visual world it accompanied. Nobody sat down and decided that the rake hornpipe would become the sound of the Krusty Krab forever. Carr chose it for one scene in the first episode. It stayed because it was right, and it was used again because it was still right. And by the time Season 1 ended, it was no longer a music choice. It was a fact about the show's world, as settled and permanent as SpongeBob's pineapple or Patrick's rock. The generation that grew up watching Season 1 absorbed the music the same way they absorbed everything else about the show, without tracking it consciously, without knowing the names of the tracks or the libraries they came from, without understanding that the rake hornpipe had nothing to do with SpongeBob before Carr chose it. They heard the rake hornpipe and they heard the Krusty Krab. They heard Aloha Oe and they heard Bikini Bottom. The music and the world became the same thing in memory, inseparable and permanent. Decades later, adults who grew up with Season 1 encounter these tracks in unexpected contexts, in other television shows, in stores, in elevators, and feel something immediate and physical before their conscious mind has time to process what is happening. The music does something to them that bypasses language entirely. It puts them back somewhere specific, back in front of a television, back in a world made of ocean and pineapples and stock music from a library in London, back in Season 1, the show that Season 1 built. The world, the characters, the voices, the music, the animation did not arrive in a vacuum. It arrived at a specific moment in television history, on a specific network, aimed at a specific audience, and landed in a cultural landscape that was ready for it in ways that even the people who made it did not fully anticipate. What Season 1 meant to the generation that watched it as children, and what it turned out to have done to them as adults, is a story that the ratings numbers and the award wins and the critical reviews from 1999 could not have predicted and cannot fully explain. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.